Select Board meeting on October 7th. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just as a reminder, if everyone would please put their electronic devices on mute, silence, vibrate, whatever works so that they do not disrupt the meeting, that would be greatly appreciated. The first item on the agenda are public hearings. There's no public hearings, so we'll move right into appointments. Mary Beth Walker, if you wouldn't mind. Is Mary Beth presenting on that?
She is, yeah. So
come on up and talking about
Mary Beth Walker is the town of Barrington's assessor's agent working for Corcoran Associates. This year, as I've updated the board and community, is a revaluation year for Barrington. Earlier today, Mary Beth put together a summary of the findings and the preliminary values for this year's revaluation. This document will be available on the town's website tomorrow. So Mary Beth's going to present the findings of that revaluation, discuss the impact with the board, and address any questions that the board may have. And so at this time, I'll turn the floor over to Mary Beth.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight. I've not been to a board meeting since we first were hired by you folks, so it's nice to come in and talk with you for a few minutes. This year was our revaluation year. Once every 5 years, we're required to revalue every community that we are in. And the last revaluation was in 2014, but we did do an assessment update in 2017 because we found that the market was moving very quickly and our ratio was falling. So due to that, most of the properties here in Barrington did not see the huge jumps that some of my other communities are seeing that only do it once every 5 years. So the information in front of you reflects sales that have occurred since October of last year to the end of September this year. That's the time period that the state will use to establish their ratio. And the state, during a revaluation year, we try to be very close to 100% of market value. We are coming in through this process around 97–98% of market value. And if you go down through the memo, what you'll find is we had about 175 sales that we consider to be arm's length or valid sales for the statistical analysis. And we are still looking at some of those sales, sending out questionnaires, talking to realtors, and to see if those are valid sales. So we may be able to vet some more of those sales out. The single-family homes were at 86% of market value before I started the adjustments, and we brought them up to 97%. The mobile homes are going to see the most change. They were at 77% of market value. And it kind of makes sense because when a market is moving this quickly, the lower end properties are going to be more valuable to whoever's purchasing them because that's what's available out there for them to buy. If you look at the single family homes, our typical single family home that is selling is 2,000 square feet, and the median of the sales out of 137 sales was about $333,000. So that might be quite high for somebody who's trying to get into Barrington and live here. So they may buy a mobile home instead. And even there, our median size is 1,200 square feet, and our average sale price was about $85,000 for a mobile home. We only had 4 condominiums that sold during that time period. We started at 90% of market value, and I brought them up to 98% of market value. And our land values, we started at 82% of market value, and I brought them up to 98% of market value. So just to keep in mind, in the end of 2018, our ratio was 91%. And starting this study, we would have been at 85% if we had done nothing, which we had to anyway because it's our year for research, for reval. And so even just in 1 year, we had overall went a 6% adjustment. So when you see your tax bills, you're going to see that your assessment in most cases has gone up. There are some properties that went down as part of this process. And single-family homes went up on average 12%. Mobile homes went up on average 31%. And our commercial properties went up between 6 to 8% of market value. There's one class of mobile homes that is going to feel a little bit more brunt. They are the mobile homes that have been put on a basement and they have a roof on them that is more like a home. They've been set up more like a home. They are selling for prices that are in between the house value and the mobile home value. And so we had to kind of come up with a different class, so to speak, of values, and we call them modular homes. And we set that at a higher square foot value than the mobile home double wides, but lower than the residential. But they are actually going to double in assessment, so be aware of that when people call you. It is, again, all market driven, and it's in response to the market. So that's the information I have for you. If I can answer any questions.
If you would, Mary Beth, just expand on that and provide a little more dialogue to the board and community about how this process is tied to market value. So when folks see houses sell and the sale price for homes, and less how the process is based on that, less than it's based on a square foot cost that you have, where the process originates for your role coming up with a fair market value as an assessment opposed to an arbitrary number.
Sure. Our appraisal date is April 1st of every year. So we have to look at what has sold over the last year to come up with our market values. And in a market that is moving this quickly, we go 6 months before and 6 months after our date of value so that we are in the same range that the state of New Hampshire is going to gauge us. What they do is they look at the assessed value and they divide it by the price of the home. And they're looking for what is that ratio. And then they come up with what is the median ratio. And that's what we use for one of the things they apply that to is for abatements. So if you receive your tax bill, you believe that you are overassessed based on the market, you have a process you can go through, and that's to apply for an abatement prior to March 1st of next year. And you have to provide documentation on sales or an appraisal of some sort that would show that the value we have on your property is overstated, and we'll go through that process. And then there's more to it after that, but that's the whole focus is market value. Those guidelines are set up by the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you.
And Tracy?
Could you share with us what fixtures category means?
So fixtures refers to the plumbing in your home. So one of the things that Tracy is doing right at the moment is looking at her property record card. We wanted to provide them to the board so that they could look them over. It's very important for you to, as I was speaking to the audience outside of the room, to look at your property record card and make sure the information on it is correct, because that is part of what we're using to value your property. And those are available online. You can print them off right online, and the new values will not be out there quite yet. But if you speak to my assistant, Amanda Noyes, She'll be able to help you with the property record cards. And if you look that over and you find that there's data that's incorrect on it, you can call her and she has a schedule, and one of my appraisers will come out and inspect the property and measure it and look at the information.
So just a question for my own understanding. When you look in the building area, you have description, area, adjustment, and then effect? Or
That's the effective square foot.
So, so if you took a square footage and then the adjustment on it is a ratio of...
The adjustment on it could be many things. It's a size adjustment, it's quality grade adjustment. There are many things to build up your home. So that's a mathematical adjustment that's been applied.
And then the effect, I'm assuming, is what's actual, like, actually applicable at the end of it?
The effective square foot, I believe, is what you're referring to.
Yep.
And that's the living space in the property. Yep, so this particular system that we use, the Avatar system, it calculates all of the square foot, but each part of your home is going to be valued differently. Your living area is going to have one value, but your decks will not have as much value, but they're considered part of the square foot. Your porches, etc., are not going to be valued the same. So that effective square foot refers to your living space.
Do you have any idea of the tax rate yet?
No, that will get set towards the end of October, beginning
Right.
of November. Once we put our forms in, they receive all their forms, they do a calculation. They meaning the state of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire DRA.
So, theoretically, around $25. I have a $500 impact this year. And then,
So,
I don't-
Dan, I'll speak to that quickly about the tax rate, just to expand on what Mary Beth said. And some of this information is in the town administrator report as well. So, setting the values is certainly one aspect of setting the tax rate, but it's not the only one. And so, you know, the voters every March set, as far as the school and the town side, set the appropriations. So the decisions that voters make in March about how much money the town has, how much money the school has, drives what money needs to be raised by taxation. There's some other factors as well, revenue and other sources that draw down what needs to be raised by taxes. But by the time the tax rate setting comes, the values, what the total assessed value for a town is another piece that is necessary, where you take how much needs to be raised and divide it into how much value is in the town, and you have your tax rate. So if this revaluation were to happen in a vacuum, where no other changes were made by voters through appropriations, where the school didn't have any increases, the town didn't have any increases, the county or the state education, no increases were made, the average increase in property values would match, as a ratio, would match a decrease in the tax rate. So the average increase in total assessed value in Barrington as a result of these preliminary values is an increase in value of 12%. So if we lived in a vacuum, which we don't, but if we lived in a vacuum, that would reduce the tax rate 12%. Now, I can tell you, because I've done the calculations in preparation for certainly voting in March and through this process, on the town side, residents will see that the town's tax rate will drop approximately 12%. Because what we asked voters for in March was to have little to no impact on the tax rate. And so the bringing in a responsible budget, as the select board did, and warrant articles with limited tax impact has allowed the increase in assessed value to be offset by a reduction in the tax rate. But as you know, the town's tax rate is only a portion of the total tax rate, about 20%. And so the school will experience an increase this year based on appropriations by voters. There will be an increase, a slight increase on the county side and on the state side. So the tax rate won't drop 12% because we don't live in a vacuum. But the total assessed values are one piece of the information used to calculate the tax rate, which, like Mary Beth said, will happen later on this month.
Go ahead, Dan.
well, I think the value is up a little high and stuff, but then next year, our correction's coming, and the economy is up, it's due. What we do with 10-year periods up, and values are gonna go down a lot. So people aren't gonna get true full value of houses next year compared to this year. What effect does that have in coming years?
So if we find that the ratio is going over 100%, then I would let Connor know, and I usually look at that right around July of each year. And whether it goes down or up, the ratio, I will let him know, and then it's up to the board whether we do an update to the values or not based on the information that we have available in July. We'll still have 3 more months of sales at that point. So we don't know what's going to happen from one year to the next. And that's one way that the board can control our ratio is by adjusting values.
Tracy?
It's my understanding that the values that are set can never exceed 115% of the actual market values. Am I correct in that statement?
The state looks at 90% to 110%.
110. Very good. Thank you.
So, I think all in all, based on what you said, Dan, the general, and what Connor said, the general comment is we're all doing our job and all of our department heads are doing their job to make sure we are maintaining a fiscally responsible town for everything that we can control. So we're doing our part, and we just want to make sure we're supporting everyone else to do theirs. Go ahead.
I just want more, make them $500.
You don't know yet.
All right. Yeah, and so just to be clear to board members and the community, so you'll see, as Mary Beth said, the information certainly available at the town hall for the new property values. We'll also make it available on the website. But when your second half tax bill comes out in December, you'll see your new value on your tax bill. And if you do have concerns, and the concerns like Mary Beth indicated are based off a disproportionality or some evidence which shows that that you're valued disproportionately to somebody else, there's a process in place for that. Staff of the town hall is familiar with the process and willing to help any resident that's looking to go through that process that has concerns about what impact their assessment has had on the property.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Sharpen your pencils. All right. Next item under appointments, exemptions, and credit discussion.
Yeah, so I'll let Mary Beth stay seated in the audience, but I wanted to have this conversation about exemptions and credits and any adjustments the select board may recommend to voters on the warrant in March. And if there are questions that the assessor can address with her knowledge and expertise, I'd like to have her available for this. So the board, starting with after the vote last year, the board began discussing the exemptions and credits offered in Barrington. So these are tax breaks. A credit is a cash value of the tax bill, and the exemption reduces the assessed value a portion based on the structure of the exemption on what's taxable. And so the board began discussing what was available to residents and what changes might need to be made. So we've provided some information and updated some information for your review. One of the documents which I'll draw your attention to is the exemption and credit analysis. So Amanda Noyes, who's in the audience tonight, put this information together for you. So this information includes all of the exemptions and credits, the aggregate information for Barrington, how many property owners are taking advantage of certain exemptions and credits, what our limits are. But the really valuable information is where Barrington stands up to a county average, a state average, and the spread in the state, the minimum and maximum. So if it were the board's intention to ask voters to make adjustments, you can look at where Barrington compares to other communities on an average basis. And so big picture, there's 688 properties that are participating in an exemption or credit. The total impact that has on taxes to be collected is a little over $500,000 at $577,000. So that's comprised of property value that's exempted at a little over $11 million, and credits which are offered, which again reduce a tax bill at almost $300,000. So this is a piece of information, again, to help guide the board's decision-making for where Barrington is with folks that are taking advantage of our exemptions and credits or utilizing them, and where we compare to other communities. Additionally, one of the pieces of information asked for at a previous select board meeting was information of federal benefits to disabled veterans. So you'll find that document in your packet as well, which indicates by percent disability what benefit disabled veterans have. And that's again based on if they're single, married, and children that they may have. So you'll find that information in there as well. Over the past 6 months, the three categories which board members have brought up on separate occasions. One is the credit for 100% disabled veterans. So George Bailey, who's not here tonight, opened discussion at the select board of offering voters to increase that credit from $2,000 to $4,000. So that, again, this isn't a decision made by the select board. The decision made by the select board is to put it on the warrant and ask voters if they're willing to support a change in an exemption or credit. So I know that's something that Select Person Bailey would like to see on the warrant, asking voters to increase from $2,000 to $4,000. The $4,000 limit was recently set by the state. It was previously $2,000. The state legislature increased that limit to $4,000 last year, allowing communities to increase that credit to $4,000. Another category that the board has talked about was the solar exemption. So when we discussed the assessing changes to solar equipment, the board was satisfied with the $5,000 added assessed value offset by the $5,000 exemption, but raised concerns that if at some point in the future there was a change in assessing practice, we want to make sure that the exemption offered covered the assessed value, any added assessed value. So what many communities do for their solar exemption is author the exemption in such a way that indicates any added assessed value is exempted from property tax. So that was another one the board had talked about. And finally, the board talked about the elderly exemption, the income and asset limits, as well as the exemption level offered. I know specifically cited was the single elderly exemption. So it would, I would offer the board to make any action to put any changes to exemptions or credits on the warrant. Tracy?
One piece of information that I think is important for us to examine. A fully disabled veteran, it appears, receives $36,000 annually in non-taxable support. Can the exemptions be piggybacked? Can you be both a service-connected, totally disabled veteran, also blind and experiencing blindness and getting that exemption, also receiving an elderly exemption?
So, and the answer to that is yes. A person who is 100% disabled also could qualify and would qualify in Barrington for the all veterans tax credit. So they would get both of those if they've applied for both. And then they could possibly receive an elderly exemption and a blind exemption. So each one is treated separately and would be approved or denied based on if they met those qualifications.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments from the board?
It appears to me, and I identified this back after the last budget cycle, that our single elderly exemption income limits are low. They're at 10% below the county average. And our married elderly exemption income limits are 10% more than the county average, with a 20% spread in the disparity between those two. My thoughts on that is, quite frankly, that it is much more difficult to generally live as a single person than it is to share expenses in a household of two or more. So my proposal at the time was that we looked very specifically at the elderly exemption income limits. And I would propose the board move that from 30,000 to 36,000.
Is that to bring it 10% above? Is that your theory?
To match the, to match the married.
Dan?
I agree with, all the figures and stuff. This is, I have a lot of public comment and stuff. There's people, and,
Right, you can use me, I'm an old lady.
no, people are, especially the other side, we're
People
gonna
are
eat.
struggling, yeah.
Well, just take me for instance, when Doug died, I went back to one, Social Security.
Right. And then two, these small increases, doesn't seem much to us. It really affects a lot of people.
They're very impactful for our elderly population, so.
Well, and probably I think the biggest impact of it is when you look at the asset limit. If you own any real aspect of your house in Barrington, you're going to be above that asset limit.
And to be clear, the primary residence is excluded from your asset limit.
Okay.
So generally, and I'll defer to Mary Beth for the specifics, let me know if I speak out of turn, but so if you owned a 1.84 acre lot with your primary residence on it, no value would be included in your asset limit. If you owned 15 acres and had a home on it, the first 2 acres in your home wouldn't add value, but the back acres would add value. And certainly if you owned additional property elsewhere with homes or land on it, it would have an asset limit. But good question, Andy.
How
Thank you
does
for
that affect, now, I've put all of my stuff in a trust with my 3 kids. And as soon as I'm dead, they own it. So is there any, is that a wise thing to have done or a poor thing to have done?
I'll defer to Mary Beth about how not whether or not it's wise, to be clear,
Whether
but
a trust is.
on how a trust is handled for income and asset limits.
Sure, whether you put your property in a trust or not, everybody has their own reasons for doing that and what type of trust. The key thing is if you're thinking about putting your property into a trust, you want to make sure that you are beneficial interest on that some way. So whether you are the trustee or you have a life estate ownership, then you're still a beneficiary to the property. If for some reason it's a revocable trust and there's no life estate to it, you really are no longer benefiting from the property in any way according to the state of New Hampshire's qualifications, and you would no longer qualify for any type of exemption or credit, even though you still reside in the home. So a lot of people, for whatever tax purposes later in life, might put their property into irrevocable type trust or life estate, and that would benefit you for this, but it may not benefit you for whatever your purpose of putting it in a trust is. So it's best for that piece of it to talk with a lawyer.
Yeah, well, I've been, that's what I did. I did it with a lawyer.
Yeah.
And it's my property as long as I'm alive. Once I'm dead, it goes automatically to my 3 kids.
So if you have any type of beneficiary interest in the property, then that's one of the very first qualifications. You would have to qualify under all of the qualifications, but that is one of the qualifications.
If you would, Mary Beth, it'll be easier for you to do it. Can you just quickly gloss over the qualifications, residency and residency in New Hampshire and length of time, those type qualifications?
Yes.
To be eligible for exemptions and credits?
So for a veteran's credit, you have to reside in New Hampshire by April 1st for at least 1 year. For a exemption for elderly, it has to be at least 3 years, and it doesn't have to be in Barrington, but it has to be a resident of New Hampshire for at least 3 years. And when you come and put your application in for a veteran's credit, you are required to provide a DD 214. Because Barrington adopted the all veterans credit, you no longer have a constraint of during certain wartime, but you do have to be active duty for at least 90 days and have an honorable discharge. Those are the key things for veterans. For an elderly exemption, you have to meet the income and asset guidelines. And for income, we count if you've taken money out of an IRA, cashed in bonds, any of that sort of thing is counted as income. Your Social Security is counted as income even though you don't pay taxes on it, and that's a question we get quite frequently. The assets, as Connor covered, your residence and 2 acres are not counted as assets, but any bank accounts, amount in your retirement accounts, your cars, any campers, any properties you own anywhere else, any tangible asset is counted towards that asset level.
Thank you.
Dan?
On the values and stuff, the prices up. Let's get back to 15 acres. I own 15 acres, I raise my family and stuff. I have an investment there, I'll pass on and stuff. But it's not an investment. Because just to get into the planning board, subdivide it, open the doors before grand. Once you pay the fee and buy a survey, that's just the start. So the money that's there, so it's hard. And so to look at it as any value, because land is not value anymore, what it costs.
Fortunately, that's something that's factored in during the assessment process. So again, if the assessor's job is to arrive at fair market value, then the market will determine the value of those 15 acres. And so if those 15 acres aren't subdivided, then you'll find on your assessment card that the back acres beyond your first buildable lot of 1.84 acres, your back acres are, the assessed value is actually quite low in comparison to your first 2 acres, because that's the buildable lot. And that's not a made-up number from the assessor, but that reflects the market value for those 15 acres, because it does take a fair amount of time and sometimes money in order to go through the process and subdivide that property into multiple buildable lots. So that's already captured in the assessment process, arriving at that fair market value.
The 2 acres is set by the state of New Hampshire, so it's not arbitrary for Barrington.
And another thing, on our property, it says 41 acres. Now, I'll eat it if it's 41 acres. If that is a way over assessment on, because it's not 41 acres there.
So this
And
would,
anybody's welcome to come up and walk it.
so I don't walk land.
No, I.
Yeah, so I'm not a surveyor, but what we do is if you have a survey or a plan, so we use the tax maps that we have. They are not official, they are not legal documents, but what they are is built up over time of information that has been provided to us through surveys and plans. So, and deeds. So if you have a deed or a plan or a survey that would show that your property record card is incorrect, then that's a piece of what you want to provide to us so that we can have accurate property record cards.
Well, the problem is that these deeds are probably older than I am. And I really would frown very highly on having to survey land that I'm going to give to my kids.
So just as a thought pattern to that, as I would tell any taxpayer, is unfortunately I have nothing else to go by except what's on the tax maps and what is on your deeds. And I'm not requiring you to survey the land, but if you would like the town, and that would be my office, to change the acreage, I would need something to use to do that, or everyone could call me and ask me to just assess them for 1 acre and they have 50. So I'm being a little bit silly on that, but that we do get some interesting requests in our office, so we have to have a set up guideline on how to do that. But any information that you have that would be concrete to show that your acreage is incorrect, then we're certainly happy to entertain it and make sure that we correct the information.
Tracy?
So in reference to the total disability service-connected veterans increase that the state has recognized, I think it would be important that the 35 residents that currently experience service-connected full disability, that we analyze those 35 to see what other credits are actually being piggybacked before making a decision. Because it appears to me that we can't make an educated decision without that information. Which I understand means pulling all 35 files and reading.
Well, so I guess less about that, more theoretical. I would, I guess the decision-making for the board on whether or not to offer voters an opportunity to increase that credit, certainly not the board's decision, but the community's decision, I would think that that would have less to do with the residents utilizing that credit that exists and more to do with holistically whether the credit should be increased or not. So if if the board's looking for further analysis of the actual residents utilizing a credit, certain details of the information provided is confidential information and not available pursuant 91A, but we could provide whatever analysis we could for those specific residents to guide
I'm
the
not
board's decision.
asking for a report, you can de-identify the information, but if we're already providing, of the 35 households, $4,000 or $5,000 at this time, based on piggybacking the credits, it would not make sense to me to recommend bringing this forward in a warrant article. It does definitely make sense to me to bring forward the single elderly exemption and get that better aligned with the other exemptions.
One thing to keep in mind with this, also with this single elderly exemption, is they could also be connected to
True.
the veteran service
That is true.
credit.
So to be clear, you would be interested in seeing of the 35 property owners utilizing the disabled credit.
Service-connected total disability credit.
You'd be interested in, yes, excuse me, thank you. You'd be interested in seeing what other exemptions or credits were utilized by that group of property owners as an aggregate number.
In a de-identified capacity, yes.
Okay, we can work on that information for you.
Pam?
I think you can find out too, there's a lot more benefits than you realize. When you go to Lowe's, you do the military 10%, they get full medical, VA and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that are offered to them that you don't realize.
As they should. It's 1% of the US population
Right.
that serves in our armed forces.
So I don't know how much information you want to calculate.
I just want to see the piggybacked exemptions to see if we're making an educated choice.
So do we want to look at that for, well, I guess I would look at there's two recommendations, hang on one second, that are being proposed. One around elderly exemption at limits, and the other one is going to be around the veterans service-connected total disability credit. Do we want to look and see if there's other, if we looked at those items, see what else is connected to them before we make a motion on this?
I would feel more comfortable.
Mary Beth?
The comment that I would like to make is you should assume that all of them have every one of the exemptions and credits and then make your decision on whether you should recommend it or not. And the reason I say that is people from one year to the next may not be able to receive any of those exemptions and credits, and people could move in and now receive them. So it's almost better to just hypothetically say that they receive all of them and make your decision based on that. You have to be, I think, very careful on what you're doing is, I understand why you're doing it, but you're selecting a small group of people and making a decision based on the people who are already receiving it right this minute. Where next year, if somebody moves or passes away, or we have 15 more people that move in that could receive those credits, they also could receive a bunch of the other ones. So if you look at it, your situation could change every single year. And Barrington's very stable, but we are building homes like crazy, and we are getting a new population here all the time. And I think it's probably a more fair decision-making to just assume they all have it, and based on the veterans credit, disabled veterans credit, would you want them to receive that higher credit? But that's just my opinion as an assessor in many locations.
And we have a unique situation, as usual. My husband has no DDT 14. Yes, none.
ED 214.
It burned up in 1954 in Indiana. And if you don't think that isn't a fun thing to try to get, and we still haven't got anything that replaces it. And I mean, he didn't set the fire, so I don't see why he's being punished. He couldn't even get the exemption from Lowe's. And he's an active war veteran. Well, he's not active anymore. But he couldn't get it. Which doesn't seem right to me, but.
So the one question that I had in reference to the comment you just made, if someone is elderly, that status will not change. If someone is service-related, fully disabled, that status will not change. So while I hear what you're saying, it doesn't appear to me that the combined exemptions could possibly fluctuate based on what I'm reading. What could fluctuate, yes, are the number of people that have served our country that move to Barrington and are then able to experience that service-related total disability. Okay. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, you're correct.
You can't get younger. You can't
No,
get
but
less
people move, they pass away, they change their trust status.
Valid.
We have
Okay.
people move in. So I guess I just want to be very cautious that we don't take 35 residents in Barrington and start analyzing them and make them feel that that's what you're making the decision based on. Because
Well, we're talking $70,000 in revenue, and if in fact that's piggybacked with other tax revenue, then I think it becomes very important to look at it.
that's why I said to assume that they get all of them. And then you've got the worst case scenario.
70,000 on service-connected, totally disabled, and then 1.5 million on the elderly exemptions.
Okay.
Okay. So, are there any motions at this point, or not yet?
My motion has been and will remain to increase the single elderly exemption from 30,000 to 36,000 to better align ourselves with state and county averages in conjunction with Barrington's exemptions.
And
Is that a
second,
motion?
yes.
That is a motion.
And second.
I'll give you a second.
motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ayer.
Roll call vote.
Air I.
That's right.
Article 5.
Nap aye.
So I'll develop a warrant article indicating that change to the single elderly income limit that will be on the warrant for town meeting in 2020. And ultimately, it'll be the residents' or voters' decision whether to make that change. What I might recommend is to continue on a regular basis of reviewing these income asset and exemption limits Some communities tie a review of exemptions and credits with their revaluation year. Again, if we're changing on average values 12%, we could consider using that as a litmus to change, also change what the exemptions are. Now you'll see that the exemptions we already offer are quite a bit higher than the county and state averages. So from an opinion perspective, I'm not saying that needs to be considered, but if we're going to keep up with what the value of our exemptions are to residents of Barrington, that would be something we could consider on a regular basis to coincide a review of exemptions and credits with the revaluation.
I'll make a motion to review credits and exemptions with reevaluations. That way we're keeping eyes on it.
And
No, just with reevaluations.
and when, how often are we doing that?
5 years.
Minimum.
So I would second that.
Air aye.
Hatch eye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye.
That was also a motion to keep me here that long, so I remember, right?
No, I don't think that one was.
Oh, okay. Just checking. Was the board interested in me drafting a warrant article regarding the solar exemption for all of the assessed value?
Yes, please.
Consensus or vote?
Second.
Be a vote.
I'll second it.
So that was a motion to put a warrant article to town meeting this March for adjusting the solar exemption to indicate exempting all added assessed value from solar equipment.
Air aye.
Up to $5,000, wasn't that the limit?
No,
It's a
the
$5,000
5,000 is what
exemption.
we've set it to.
Right.
If the value of the actual equipment is 100,000, then the exemption is 100,000.
Right.
And that's residential
The
only?
usage
I was
of
just
green.
thinking it was tied to 5. The 5K was the number I had in my brain.
Because that's what it is now, currently, right? So to your point, Select Person Air, what I would propose for a warrant article, if you give me a second, I'll pull it up. You can carry on.
I think we're waiting on you.
Oh.
Put you under any pressure.
I apologize.
Mr. Geiger, but we-
So I was intending to use the same language that the community used when initially instituting the solar exemption. And that had language that indicated, believe it indicated use of the solar, benefiting from the solar locally, which would prohibit benefiting from the solar exemption if you were farming solar to sell elsewhere. But the board will review the
Right.
final warrant article.
Understood.
Not for commercial, not for industrial use.
Yeah, that's not what it says, but
No.
I have it here.
But the gist of it, we
To see if the
understand.
town will vote to modify the provisions of RSA 72, 61 through 64 inclusively, which provide for an optional property tax exemption from the property's assessed value for property tax purposes for persons owning real property which is equipped with solar energy systems intended for use at the immediate site. And that's language recommended by the Department of Energy Administration, right?
So that,
Yeah.
and a second.
Did I motion it or second it?
I don't know. I think you
it's-
motioned
It's
it,
all
I
running
seconded
together
it,
at
or
this
I
point.
think
Mr. Air did.
No, I think
Whoever motioned it and
I
seconded it,
think
however
it's
we have it.
You said we were ready to.
Nap aye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Hatch eye.
Air aye.
And then, does anybody want to make a motion on the service-connected total disability
I
credit?
don't have enough information to do that.
I think that's our selectman's baby, and I think it would be nice to consider it and discuss it when he is here.
I can put that specifically on the agenda for a future meeting and work to collect the information that the select board requested.
Because I think it's important to him.
I would agree with you, Tom.
Alrighty. Moving right along. Budget presentation, fire, EMS, and the cemetery.
What section are we in?
Thank you very much, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was a long conversation.
And I'd also like to specifically thank Amanda Noyes, who works in the assessing office, for supporting Mary Beth and putting together a lot of the information for tonight's meeting. You'll remember that that was a position we combined from the assessing office upstairs with the building position, and that's been very much a success so far. I will also take this opportunity to point out that our fire chief has continued the tradition now for the third meeting in a row, bringing snacks to the budget presentation. So I'll encourage board members or folks in the audience to draw your attention to the double stuffed Oreos in front of Select Person Hatch for your enjoyment as the fire chief presents his budget.
I worked really hard getting them ready for you today.
Yeah. And I'll put the police chief and deputy police chief on notice for the 21st that, you know, three meetings in a row we've had snacks, so.
Donuts. I'd like to see you guys top that. I'd like to see you guys top that.
We're not grading the quality of the treats.
But his wife, you know,
It's gotta be done.
probably put something together that we all would enjoy.
Are you kidding? That fire station knows how to cook.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
So I'm gonna
Thank you.
follow Select Person Hatch's lead. She told me to be short and sweet. So the thing is, if you guys would just approve my budget right now, I'll just go back and say that will be all done.
If you take 10% out, we can get that done immediately.
That's right.
10%. But I'm going to just highlight on, if you look at your 219 fire rescue budget spending summary, I'm going to just use that to do the highlights, because those are the lines that were either 10% overspent or 10% underspent. And then the projected increases. So if you look at the line 4140 overtime line, it was budgeted $8,000. I think before payroll today, we were about 100% spent. I anticipate by the end of the year that I'll be close to $10,000 or about $2,000 over. Part of that, I believe, is attributed, well, there's two things attributed to it. We lost a full-time firefighter, and there was a little bit of overlap of getting a position filled, and in some cases, I needed to use the single full-timer I had left to fill open shift. And then when I run into problems with getting per diem people to cover a shift, it ultimately falls back onto one of the full-timers needing to cover it. So I'm showing that in 2020, I'm going to increase it, and I'm requesting an increase from $8,000 to $9,000. The EMS operating supplies, we budgeted $4,000. I expect that line to go over. That was a mistake on my part. I actually left more money in the fire and EMS, the 01 4651 operating expense line. Them two should have been swapped. So while I expect 01 4651 to be underspent, the EMS operating supplies line will be overspent. Are there any questions on either one of those? Lines that will be 10% or more underspent, the part-time hourly line. At 2019, I budgeted $18,000. I anticipate that I'll spend about $8,500. in the 2020 proposed budget, I expect an increase. The reason for that is the part-time hourly, for a number of factors, we haven't been able to get the on at night weekend staffing up and running. I hope to have that up and running soon. We're working diligently to get the space that I need finished up. But that's why that hasn't been done yet. This was budgeted with the idea that it would have been ready to move in March. That was my plan, and for a number of factors that were that hasn't happened. So because the upstairs space isn't finished, I've not been able to put anybody on overnight yet.
I have a question on that. Is it one of those you can put somebody on overnight, but they just have to be awake the entire night? They can't be sleeping?
Well, yes and no, I guess. We've used that space. We've used the space up there for better than 15 years for sleeping purposes, off and on a regular basis. That space has been used. Because we have made a change to the space, the code, depending on who you talk to, determined we need to make changes. We're in the process of making them changes now, so I felt it was best not to move forward in a direction of specifically earmarking that place as an area, as a sleeping area, until we got them rooms done. The building's been sprinkled. We're waiting for some paperwork from the company to put the sprinkler system in to make sure that they're in compliance, and then it's my hope that we can get the building department to sign off, and we've got permission to get the space closed up. One of the factors was the fact that we no longer have a facilities manager, so it's kind of fallen on us to take over that role and get it done. So that's slowed me down a bit, but again, I'm guardedly optimistic that all the pieces are going to fall into place within the next few weeks, and we'll get that space done and should be able to move forward.
Dan?
I had to clarify something. If someone's on call and their travel distance is out of the area, don't they have the option to be around?
Yep. Yep, they have to be within 12 minutes of the station. We don't require them to be at the station, because if we require them to be at the station, we'd have to pay them at least minimum wage, but because they're not required to be there, we don't have to. The point system, I anticipate will be underspent by about 30%. I have reduced that line by about $5,000. That's a tough line to budget because we don't know who's going to respond and how many calls we're going to have. So that what I kind of have to look at would be a 3-year average and adjust that line accordingly. Because it is, again, we're at the mercy of the call volume and the people that show up.
Tracy?
Have we had any fundamental changes in mutual aid agreements that would indicate there'll be a decrease or increase in calls?
No. The ambulance call volume is about where it was last year at this time. The fire call volume is down a little bit right now. But again, looking at those kind of numbers on a 3 or 4 year average, I certainly expect medical calls to go up as the population ages. That just the trends are showing across the country that the medical side is going to get busier. the fireside should stay relatively stable with fire prevention and code changes. But again, the point system is the kind of thing that we look at that on should be looking at that on a 3-year average to see how close the numbers are.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Per diem hourly.
Per diem hourly,
We've
So-
skipped it, so let's just get to it.
that's the next, well, that's the next
The
line.
fire chief's following the summary, which per diem hourly is the next line on the summary.
Did you want me to go line for line? I can't, we can start at the top.
Let's talk about the per diem hourly.
So moving on to the per diem hourly, the per diem, that's where the line comes to pay the part-time hourly people. In my 220 proposed budget, I'm proposing to add one more night of double coverage. Again, if I can go back to the last couple of years, I've talked about a model of trying to be at 2 people on staff, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week within the next, within 5 years. So the budget last year you so graciously approved the Friday and Saturday night, or 2 nights I should say, of 2 people staffing for 38 weeks. So part of that is the increased 14 weeks for, so that we'll have the money in the 2020 budget to do that. And then I added a single night of 2-person coverage for another 38 weeks. So the idea being is that we would pick up either 3 nights of double coverage, or there'd be money there to do 6 nights of single coverage. So again, I've started to look at what other communities are doing, and I admit that I'm a little bit concerned of trying to, the labor market right now is pretty tough. And so if we went with a model of a single person on staff at the station, right now we could do 4 nights. With that added night would give us 6, and we would back it up with a on-call firefighter and an on-call EMT. Much like the on-call EMT situation is right now. One of the things I'm struggling with is that I currently, EMS on-call schedule calls for 14 EMS call responders to be available for the 7 nights. We have about 8 or 9 EMTs that try to cover those 14 nights, and what ultimately that means is some people take 2 or 3 shifts to make it work. Some people don't take any shifts every week. Sometimes they'll take 1 or 2 a month, and I end up backfilling the once in a while. On average, I backfill 1 shift a week. The last couple of weeks, I've had 2 shifts because somebody's on vacation and normally takes 2 shifts. So I'm starting to look at the fact that these few people that are taking 2 or 3 shifts, just can't continue down that path, and that we're going to get to a point where we're not filling them. So it's kind of headed me in the direction of taking and putting 1 person on for a night, and therefore only needing 1 EMT to cover the other side of it, that instead of having to fill 14 shifts, I'm looking at 8 or 9 or 10 shifts, which may be a little bit more manageable. One of the questions that the ABC had was looking at, when we looked at per diem and part-time hourly people, was wanting to look at what our call volume was and were there spikes in the call volume or were we busy in certain areas. And the request for increased staffing has nothing to do with call volume or busy or not. The request for increased staffing is solely based on the need to have people available to respond. And unfortunately, the business, the fire and EMS business, this isn't unique to Barrington. It's all of the communities that try to operate on this model are struggling to get people to come out and cover these things. So I'm trying to be creative enough to make sure that we have people to go out and cover these things when the need arises. So it really has zero to do with how busy we are and more about making sure we've got a couple of people to come out and respond when a request for aid is made.
General comments from the board? Tracy?
So Chief, if there is a call and there was one person on coverage at the station, can they operate a vehicle and get it to a fire scene if need be? And could other on-call people from their homes report to that location?
Yes. So from an ambulance standpoint, a lot of times that happens. One of us will grab the ambulance, we'll go along. If I'll use Tony Maggio, for example, he lives over on the Route 4 side of town, so if the call's over there on his side of town, he'll go direct to the scene. One of us will go grab the ambulance and meet him on scene. We'll do whatever with the patient transporters, and we'll go back to the scene and drop Tony off to his vehicle. If we were going, if there was somebody at the station and we were going for a smoke detector activation up on Green Hill Road or whatever, and there was 1 or 2 people at the station, they could come along with a truck and we could meet them there to help facilitate that. So again, a lot of the communities are operating on that model of having one person and then trying to backfill it as kind of a stepping stone to get where we need to be.
Dan?
Since I do a lot of observations, at nighttime the fire department is very professional and organized crew and stuff. They do a real good job, and you should be very proud of them. I pull to the side and I stand a little, watch them work. I don't say anything, observation only. They're very professional and good people.
We certainly appreciate that, and I'll make sure my people understand that, because that's,
I've said it before.
I know you have, and I'm happy to, that's what we're supposed to do, but it's, important for my people to understand that people are watching them and seeing them do a good job, so thank you. The ambulance contract line.
Excuse me.
Whoops, sorry.
Sorry. You're correct in talking to the issue of coverage, but one of the things that we need, I need to, as a member of the budget committee, is to look at, okay, what is your response time that you're missing today without the coverage? In other words, if you can't get there in time because you don't have coverage, how many times does that occur, and where do you turn when you don't have somebody who's there?
Well, certainly we have mutual aid programs in place, so that I'll give you an example. A lot of times during the day with 3 of us there, today the ambulance was out, and I was back at the station. We get another call, then there was probably one other person around town for the fire, nobody for the ambulance, and we're dependent on a mutual aid ambulance to come into town to assist us. And the same thing, we have mutual aid pacts with other communities for fire services, but we have an obligation as a community to provide services for ourselves. And, you know, I can assure you this, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to anybody, but there's a difference between somebody that maybe has a very minimal injury or a minimal sickness and can wait 15 minutes for an ambulance to come out, or somebody that's life or death. And, you know, certainly I'm not going to stand here and say that life or death, you know, adding one person is going to make a difference, because that would be foolish to say that. But I certainly think that the community has a moral obligation to, and myself, especially as a fire chief, to make sure that we have the pieces in place so that we're managing the staffing and managing the people, so that should somebody have a life or death event at 10 o'clock at night, they're not waiting for an ambulance to come out of another community because we don't have staffing in place. So
I'll make a general comment on this. As a person who, for the last 4 years, has sat here, 3 years, this is my 4th year, I guess, sitting here now, and has repeatedly raised the concern that we were going to see a massive budget spike, and we took a hit last year, and then have a big hit going this year. I agree with the fact that there is a moral obligation, but I also think it is part of our responsibility to figure out how to do that is reasonably and effectively to our taxpayers. So, you know, 1, 2, maybe even 3% we can eke out here or there, but to take a 5% hit or almost 6% hit this year plus the hit we took last year is a double whammy to our taxpayers as well. And we did, last year, the whole target was on the fact that we were going to do things that minimized this impact long-term to our people and bought us a few years before we created additional impact. And also, as a person who has had that life-threatening injury and waited an hour for an ambulance because I was in a rural area, was it pleasant? No, but have I been through it? Absolutely. So is it ideal? No, but that's part of what you get when you live or do something in a rural community.
unfortunately, we're not in a rural community anymore. And unfortunately, you're right. The 5 of you, it's your job to decide how much money you're willing to spend for emergency services. And, you know, the fire service, fire EMS, for many, many years, operated strictly on a volunteer system. And the expectation is that back in the day, a bunch of farmers would show up with a fire truck, and if they got the fire put out before it got too bad, great. If not, then you rebuilt your house. And in 1975 or 76, Joel Sherman rode around in his car with a Band-Aid box in his car, and you waited for an ambulance out of Rochester or Dover or Benoit and Somersworth. And so the 5 of you, it's your job to decide what you want for service. But I'm here to tell you, and I've been telling you for the last 3 or 4 years, that the model that we've used, the volunteer fire and EMS service in this country, is broken. And if you, now wait a minute, it doesn't matter if it's here in New Hampshire, you're seeing volunteer fire companies closing on a daily basis, and people don't have the time to donate to do this stuff. And, you know, having somebody that's been in the fire service since 1978 and saw that when we had a fire call, and it was 40 or 50 calls a year, that, you know, that wasn't such a big drag on a person's time. You go up and you trained every week, and then 40 or 50 calls a year or 60 calls a year amounted to 1 a week. Now you're looking at, we're doing 1,100 calls a year. You can't sustain that on volunteers. Trust me, I pay taxes in this town after listening to the assessment, my taxes, my home assessment's gonna double. I get it, but you know what? The point, my job, I don't ask the five of you to understand what it takes to run a fire department. That's why you have a fire chief. But what I'm telling you is that the day of, a bunch of farmers are gonna drop what they're doing and come running out to make sure that if you have a life-altering event or your home's on fire, them days are gone. And so, I don't like where this is gone, but it's a fact.
I guess my big rub on it is that we went, round and round for the better part of a year, looking at responder points and how we turned it into essentially like a part-time hourly compensation model, and we did all kinds of changes to create that buffer that would keep us kind of rolling along and keep a reasonableness to what we're doing from a budget end, and then to eke another one in here is just a little painful right now after everything that we're seeing.
It's a lot painful, Andy, but again, you don't have any, where do you have volunteers in this town? Nowhere. You have no volunteers left that are providing the services that you're asking firefighters and EMTs to do. And I don't have the answers. I don't know what the answers are. But I don't think we got any choice but to stand there and try to fix this. Now, the problem comes back to is either I'm a staunch believer that if it costs you right now, if it costs the taxpayers, a firefighter, irrespective of what you pay for their hourly rate, it costs another, whatever, $5 or $6 or $7 an hour in benefits. So, to me, you should be standing there with open arms saying, I want to pay the person that doesn't get them benefits, I'll pay them that money, I'll match that money, because I'm only going to pay them for the hour and a half or 2 hours that I need them, not the 12 hours that they're going to be there in case there's a call.
Tracy?
I think it's important to note, Chief, that across the country, firefighters, applicants going into this line of work have decreased in conjunction with those going into police service. Many people are not choosing this line of work. And a few things that you have mentioned over the years that ring true in my head is that we have trained multiple people who have then gone from Barrington to full-time roles within other surrounding Seacoast communities. So it becomes very clear to me that you do an excellent job training people within your department, and then it is a feed into surrounding communities with 15 of them that you mentioned last year.
Important to understand that some of them stay in this town and help out.
I understand, and
we appreciate
we appreciate that, and given that you've given them excellent training, I think that speaks to what you've provided to their careers as well. We have a comp study coming out, and at that time, we're going to be reviewing rates of pay specific to this position as well, and we may see a very marked increase in the future budgets based on the results from that survey. And we did choose to increase the stipend to increase the response that you needed, and it doesn't look like that has had to be used.
We didn't agree to increase it. What we agreed to was that we would stay at the rate, and at the end of the year, in December, I was to come back to you with how much money was left in that line and the number of points I went out with, and then you guys would consider adding more money to it.
It was my understanding 5 or 6 specific individuals received an increase.
No, they were put over to part-time hourly, which,
And received an increase.
for doing their job as in a supervisory role.
The increase occurred regardless of whether it was an increase in stipend or increase in shift to a new position. I'm simply trying to point out that we supported those increases, Chief.
And I certainly appreciate the fact that you supported this stuff, but it's imperative, it's incumbent on me to make you people understand, and you've touched on it, people are not getting in the business, they're not lining up. They're not gonna fix the problem before I retire, and I know that. But this is a bigger problem in Barrington, in Rochester, and Dover, and Portsmouth. This is gonna be done on the state level, and the problem is, you know, for years, the smaller departments, the Barringtons, and the Miltons, and the Lees, and the Farmingtons of the world would put firefighters together, and that ultimately some of them would get hired into the Rochesters and the Dovers, and sometimes people would leave the Dovers and the Rochesters, maybe go to Manchester or bigger departments. Well, when the Barringtons and the Farmingtons and the Miltons are not developing new, younger firefighters, that creates a void for the Rochesters and the Dovers and the Portsmouths. And when they can't come grab firefighters from our smaller communities, it forces, it's a downward spiral, and it hurts all of us. And again, it's, what's very concerning to me is the fact that it's important to understand that even if tomorrow morning the 5 of you sat right here and said, fine, here you go, chief, we'll give you 16 firefighters, we'll put 4 on per shift, 7 days a week, you'll have a 4-person shift, bang. First of all, I don't know where we would hire 16, but that's still, that's minimum staffing, and that still doesn't, we still need all the call members, and we still need the volunteers, because there are times when we need far more than 3 or 4 people to do this. So the problem we have is kind of it's a double-edged sword. We have to find ways to encourage the current volunteers or call members that we have to continue to want to do this and help the town, because I know we're not going to get to a point where we're going to hire 16 people anytime soon. Even if, you know, in a perfect world, the best I could hope for is to be 2 people per shift, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. 2 people can't do it. We need to keep them people. So this business, you know, I think we've done it, you know, I've been here 20 years. I know what the increase in my budget was from when I got here 20 years ago to where I am today. I know where the fire alarm was 20 years ago and where it is today. You are right, but the cost for us as a community, whether it's me doing it or whatever, is not going to go down. It's going to go up. We have to figure out a way that we can do it in a way that we can afford it, but it's not going to go the other way.
So let me ask a question, and this is me just thinking creatively about things. Does it make sense to have your 3 full-time people all on the day shift? Do you start looking at shifting people to off-shift coverage to make sure you have a full-time person covering that space?
Well, maybe. But the problem comes back to is that the daytime is the toughest time for us, because the vast majority of the people that are around to cover calls have full-time jobs during the day. So obviously that's how Barrington got to the point of hiring a fire chief and 2 other full-timers, and we backfill a 3rd position with a per diem employee, so that there can be 3 of us, and that the full-timers, one of them works 3 12-hour days, the other one works 4, and then they swap. The part of what I proposed to you to have the discussion about hiring 2 more full-time employees would have been to have each of them employees would have been on a 24-hour rotational shift, in which they would have worked a schedule similar to work a day, 2 days off, work a day, 4 days off, and they would get their hours are based on an 8-week cycle, so that we stay within Department of Labor rules. And by having that person, it's much exactly like you're saying, you'd have that one person around, somebody around the clock to do that. That's exactly where we need to be. The problem is, with only 2 full-time employees, we can't we don't have that flexibility to make that work that way. And certainly, part of my argument for 2 more full-time employees would be that the current full-time employees would rather work a schedule like that, a 24-hour schedule, and that's appealing to them. One of the things that I put a lot of work into and looking at is that, again, we've approved, and I spoke to Connor a little bit about the other day, we've approved 2 overnight employees on Friday and Saturday night. So if we put one on my 2 current part-time employees, and I added 2 more part-time employees and gave them 24 hours, which I could do within the confines of the budget and not have an increase, I would put one on Thursday night from 6 p.m. to Friday night at 6 p.m., Friday to Saturday, Saturday to Sunday, and Sunday to Monday, or whatever, how the 4-day work. Then them 4 would just rotate, so it would be Thursday this week, Friday next week, Saturday the week after, Sunday the week after that. The problem you run into is the 2 permanent part-time employees I have are young, and it doesn't bother them quite so much right now to necessarily work a Friday or Saturday night, but at some point, you can't expect them to work every single Friday or Saturday night. So by moving by using that model of 1 person and a rotation of 4, in theory, would give them 2 weekend nights off a month, and that is palatable. And again...
And you said you could do that within your current budget, within the budget?
Yes. Within what's approved right now, in my 19 budget, I can make that happen.
And I was just going to take a minute and draw the conversation to the change proposed, which is on those exact lines. So the per diem line, the 4124, the increase from 83,000 to 115,000 does 2 things. One, it does the full implementation of those 2 positions for 2 nights or 1 position for 4 nights, but it also adds 2 positions for 1 night or 1 position for 2 nights. So this is what has been delayed in implementation based on the facility changes happening upstairs. So the specific request, the request that's different in this budget cycle for 2020 than last year is the addition of either 2 nights with 1 person or 1 night with 2 people. And so if there are questions or more information about that specific change, we can collect other information, but the last year's budget and the proposed budget for next year has, if fully implemented next year, has money for 2 positions for 2 nights or 1 position for 4 nights. And this just add 2 more.
So my takeaway on that is based on what Rick said, he could add the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday within his 2019 budget.
Correct.
And then I would be much more inclined to find like another compromise of halving that somewhere in there to add like another person that maybe fills in somewhere there, but that cuts down this total percentage.
Correct. And again, I think that what has kind of headed me down that path a little bit, and I think that'll play a little bit into what the Budget Committee has talked about, is the ambulance revolving fund. And I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit, but the question came up on whether the ambulance revolving fund could be used for anything other than ambulance. Now, originally, when that was put together in, I believe, 2013, the answer was no, it had to be EMS. In 2018, the law was successfully changed to allow a municipality to use that for fire or EMS. My understanding is that if the town fathers chose to go back and wanted to make a change to that so that could be used for fire type stuff, it would require us to go back before the voters and ask the voters to change it. But what I think makes more sense is that I can go back and crunch the numbers and perhaps rather than making a change and taking the fund and changing that warrant article, it's pretty clear, and Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you follow warrant articles pretty close. It says, the warrant article said that was 50% went into the revolving fund to be used for the purchase of an ambulance and for EMS staffing.
That's right.
Didn't it say?
Not entirely.
I actually have the language from both warrant articles handy, following up on legal review. So it was originally set in 2011 by town meeting and then was adjusted in 2013 and the use was expanded. And so I can pull up the specific language in 13, which changes. So the modification says, to see if the town will vote to modify the ambulance service revolving fund previously established, providing 50% of revenues received from ambulance fees deposited. The money in the fund shall be allowed to accumulate from year to year. The town treasurer shall have custody. The purpose of the fund shall be changed such that funds may be expended for replacement and maintenance of ambulance equipment and vehicles, as well as for employee and other expenses directly related to the provision of ambulance services.
So the reason I go back to is when we originally put that in place, we asked to hire, at the time, what was 36 hours worth of staff, two persons on Saturday and Sunday, 9 hours each, so 18 hours a day, 36 hours a week to come out of there. And since then, we've continued to do that. Perhaps what might go back and look at the numbers and we might be able to take more staffing out of that to accomplish what I'm trying to do in the overnight. And maybe it makes more sense, which is kind of the direction I've been going in, is to try to get one person at the station overnight, 6 or 7 nights a week, which I think is more manageable, finding somebody to come in and cover one shift, move my 2 permanent part-timers now and pick up 2 more to cover them 4 nights. And maybe we can accomplish one person on, and maybe that's the Band-Aid that we use for the next year or 2. But again, I don't have an answer for it, but I was, you know, I think we have to be creative, and I think the most important thing is taking care of the call-in volunteers that we have. That should be our primary concern, and try to be creative within the confines of what we got, but it's, I don't know any other way to say it other than it's just not going to get any cheaper. We're going to pay the people. We don't have any choice. You know, it's not any different that, you know, I could show you numbers that says a community our size should have so many firefighters and EMTs on staff, much like the police department can do, but what you should have and what we can afford are 2 different things. And I don't disagree with you. I 100% don't disagree with you, but it's important to understand that I don't stand here every year and ask for an increase in my budget because I like to spend your money. I think I show year in and year out that I give money back. I ask for what I believe I need, and if I don't need it, I don't waste it, I give it back. It's just, it's a sad fact of where we are. Where we were 40 years ago, we're never going to go back to that.
Rick, I do appreciate your offering to look at use of the revolving fund for more than just the ambulance itself. As you're doing that, would it also make sense to see whether we should go back to the voters to ask to use some of that for equipment as well, to maybe reduce the requirements from that budget through the revolving fund?
And I think, you know, and to piggyback on that other question you folks asked about, so when the number I threw in for a cardiac monitor on the revolving fund and the stretcher being about $40,000 worth of equipment just in 2 pieces, assuming that we can look at the numbers that we have within that revolving fund, maybe it makes sense to move them 2 big ticket items into that fund, and therefore, while we it would be nice to have the equipment line to get up to $100,000 if it took us a few years longer to get there. I don't know that that would be, there would be anything wrong with that. And again, looking at, I asked for $50,000 for a fire truck, and I asked for $50,000 to be put away for radios, and I asked for $10,000 to be put away for this and that. It's just at some point I have to stop asking for stuff. And
Just one other question I would have, just for information purposes, and perhaps it'll help with the analysis on staffing, is how frequently do you respond to mutual aid requests from other towns?
as a community, I can get them numbers for you. Rough number, I'm gonna say that we probably go out of town about 30 times a year, and probably between finding us about 15 to 20 times.
Does
they
your
come back.
data indicate the reason for that, why that town came up short?
It's, I don't know if it's fair to say come up short.
They need your help.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is a typical structure fire, for example, could have anywhere from 20 to plus people on scene. And so, you know, again, 40 years ago, if you needed 20 people, you might have got 10 farmers from Barrington and 10 farmers from Stratford, and that's, you use them two communities to get you 20 people. Today, to get them same 20 people, you might have Barrington, Rochester, Dover, Madbury, Lee, coming into Barrington to get that same number of people, because they don't have 10 to 12 people coming in. So most of the time, the request for help is because they need an engine company, which could be 2 or 3 people.
Dan?
Years ago, there was an incident, someone else spawned and stuff. And that day, I counted in my mind who responded that helped us out. If we would have added up that day, it would be a scary amount of money if we had to pay for it. But I responded to someone committed suicide out there and stuff.
So, I mean, I think we've had a really good conversation about all of this. Is it reasonable for you, you know, you talked about, you can go back and look at a couple items specifically around overtime and per diem hourly, I believe, were, and then part-time hourly around those line sets?
Yes, certainly, because typically you take the budget under advisement at this point.
Yep.
Certainly I can go back and look at numbers and see if I can, A, reduce my budget down to a little bit less of an increase for one, and see if we can be creative enough to, I think there is some money within the ambulance revolving fund that we could work with. I just want to caution the town a little bit on the ambulance revolving fund. We're in the process right now of having to, Medicare's coming out with a thing where we're going to be forced to justify the amount of money that it costs to run an ambulance. Typically, Medicare reimbursement for ambulance service is about 28% of the actual cost for the ambulance. Those are national numbers. I don't, for 1 second, believe that Medicare is going to go, okay, here's the other 72%. What I think they're going to do is they're going to look at Barrington's numbers. They're going to look at everybody's numbers, but they're going to look at our numbers, and we have to justify them, and we won't. And the bigger concern about that is we're only getting 28% of Medicare payment, and that's what we're getting. But the bigger concern I have is that the national insurers are going to jump right on board with, hey, well, wait a minute, Medicare is only giving this much money, we're only giving you the same thing. That's going to take, and that will have a negative impact on the amount of money that will come into that account. So I just caution us to be a little bit careful about how we use money out of that until we get a good handle, which I believe will be in the next 2 years, on how much money is going to come in based on where ambulance billing is headed.
Okay. Andy? So go ahead, Peter.
Oh, it's not gonna reach. Oh, I have to slide the chair. I apologize.
That's fine.
My concern, same as with the rec really, is what we could honestly appropriate from the revolving fund. And I think if that proves to be not enough, then the solution to that is to go back to town government and ask for higher than 50% reimbursement to that fund. But things like EMS operating supplies clearly are eligible to come from the revolving fund according to that warrant article in 2013. And if these people that you intend to hire are going to be EMTs, not firefighters, that money could come from the revolving fund. So I think that would be an opportunity to really look at how to reduce this budget. I think it would make the chair more content with where the budget is. It would make me more content if we're better utilizing that revolving fund, which currently has about $180,000. It's not like we're on, the last few bucks. And again, if it proves to be not enough, let's go to town meeting and make it 60% or whatever percent we decide is appropriate. But to just, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, Rick, but just to hoard the money and say, I don't want to spend it out of that fund, probably isn't the best solution to our problem.
I don't take that as a derogatory comment. I don't take it as hoarding. I will say this through my own ignorance. I don't look at that line because it's not part of in my budget. I make the assumption that, once in a while I get a monthly statement that says this much got put in, but I don't have any idea how much is in there. If somebody would have said, I'll give you $100 bill if you can tell me how much is in there within $1,000, I still would have lost because I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
I make the assumption that if I was running too much money out of there, somebody in that office would have looked at me by now and said, knock it off because you're out of money. But so I know where you're getting at, and I think that there's probably a very good chance that I can go back and by the time you guys get ready to put this budget together to bed, can maybe come up with a compromise that helps me get to where I believe the town needs to be, and certainly the 5U, it would be palatable to you to say, okay, we understand it's going to cost us money, let's figure out how to do this, and also go along with what the budget committee's recommendation is to be using a little more money out of that, and perhaps I can sit down with you for 5 minutes and you can tell me that, my biggest fear is making sure that I don't take enough money out of there so that when it's time to replace the ambulance, that there is money there to do that. That we don't sit there and go, oh, there's not quite enough money and now we have to ask for money,
So I'm hearing three three main things to come back with. One regarding staffing. So a more specific indication of how the current budget and the proposed budget would address staffing concerns. Utilization of the revolving fund, really for two reasons. One for staffing, and then one also for operating budget items, for or against those expenses, offsetting those operating budget expenses from the revolving fund. And so are there other aspects of the fire, EMS, or ambulance or cemetery budget that we want to put on hold until the fire chief comes back? The warrant articles or...
I haven't done the cemetery yet.
Well, make that.
That's the one budget I trust exactly as it is.
I would just suggest that the employee benefit line, which year-to-date doesn't reflect 1/3 of the expenditures we looked at, so that if it's at all...
So to Tracy, to answer that question, the benefit side of that, hiring for the part-time hourly, yes, would be a little bit on there'd be nothing on the workers' comp, there'd be a little bit on short-term disability and vacation time, but those are relatively small numbers, right?
Vacation time for part-time employees?
Yeah, because they're over 20 hours.
And the estimated year end for that line is 100,000. And so that line alone is estimating to give back about $55,000.
And so I think it's something we should consider since we're budgeting for $163,000 next year. It's giving back $55,000.
And I guess that's a good question, and I would accept direction from the board if you'd like to change how it's done. So I included the information on how the benefits are calculated. And certainly one of the assumptions made in calculating benefits is full staffing for the proposed staffing. And so I know that the chair of the advisory budget committee indicated that it's not inappropriate, especially with high turnover rate positions, to not assume that you'll be fully staffed for the entire year. Those were the assumptions made, and so the budget, for the proposed budget for 2020 makes the assumption of full staffing for not only the full-time positions, but also the per diem positions and part-time positions that would be eligible for benefits. So if given full staffing in the proposed budget numbers presented tonight, that's the benefit line which would be necessary. So if you'd like me to change the benefit calculation, I'd be happy to, but with some direction on what different assumptions you'd like to make. And so earlier in the budget binder, I can give you I believe it's section 3, are the specific assumptions made for wage and benefit calculations. And so if you see an assumption there that you think should be different, or you'd like to see different, even just for one category in the fire department, I'd be happy to change that.
Seems like a large amount of money going back from last year's budget is my point.
Well, so I think the reason you see a lot going back is because of how the staffing there. We haven't been full staffed on both so all of those wage categories that you see the fire department giving back this year, those are all obviously have accompanying benefits which are also being given back. So I didn't make the proposed benefit line for 2019. My assumption is that that benefit line was generated based on full staffing for the fire chief's proposal for 2019. I did make the $163,000 calculation. How I made it is in the binder, and I can make adjustments, but you just have to let me know how you'd like to see it adjusted, because it assumes full staffing.
Do you have a recommendation?
Sorry, it's my understanding that the chief is going back to look at the schedule based on the 2019 budget and seeing what could be utilized per schedule within the constraints of that budget. If that's the case, would we still need to increase the employee benefits line?
So any changes made to wage lines would have a corresponding change in the benefit lines.
Okay. So do we want to target November 9th to come back, November 4th to come back and have a follow-up conversation on this?
I'll certainly have the information back to you ahead of time in form in which you guys can all review, a budget committee can review it and have ample time to, if you had any questions about that, so that we don't have this run forever.
I'm sorry, did I just hear from Select Person Hardikoff a goal of level funding the wage lines? Is the board or the ABC interested in setting goals of increase or confines as to come back as compromise?
I feel very uncomfortable making choices to increase the number of employees when we don't know what the impact to the compensation line is going to be based on the study results that we're going to get. That's clearly, from a very personal perspective, I support fire and EMS. I know what areas we're looking at from a compensation task force perspective, and I know which particular departments that we can be expecting changes to comp on, and I'm concerned when the study comes back that we will not have waited to make a decision on this, and there may be a much larger impact than we're expecting to both wage and employee benefit line.
So
That is my personal response as one of 5.
So I think the direction I was headed in was that I was going to look at being creative with bringing part-time and per diem people in place so that it would have a minimal impact on the benefits line and perhaps a little bit more of an impact on the salary line. And the reason I would ask not to have my hands tied behind my back and not have increases in the salary line is that if you come back, if the compensation study comes back to say that we need to increase the salary side of it, that perhaps some of that money would already be there, as opposed to, I'm not looking at adding staffing, any kind of a staffing model that should create any kind of a huge increase in the benefits line, because it won't be an insurance, it won't be retirement, it'll be strictly for part-time, for a couple of part-time employees. I think we give a little bit of vacation time. They get earned time based on their hours worked, right? And then they get a short-term disability, which is a minimal cost. A per diem employee doesn't get any of that because they're typically hired just to fill a shift when it's open. So I really, the model I'm looking at is not going to put a huge impact on the benefits line. If the Warren article were to succeed to let the voters decide on 2 full-timers, that's where your benefits line would take a big hit.
That's probably the item I have the biggest struggle with, is putting that in as a warrant article.
I get that, and I know that there's a lot of stuff out there, and I certainly do get that, and you know, I think it's, again, I presented that to you folks because one, it gave me the opportunity to have a conversation with you about where I think the department's headed and the fact that we need people, and you know, again, there's a pie that's this big, and everybody's got to get a piece of it. At some point, you run out of pie, and so I get that.
I mean, I give you a lot of credit. It's very strategic to make it as a warrant article.
Well, I view it less about strategy and more about the fact that I think it's a big enough expense that the voters should decide that. The truck replacement schedule, the piece of paper you got new tonight, and I apologize because I didn't update the numbers and I should have. One of the questions that the budget committee had was updating the numbers. I'm reluctant to go out to 2032. We had a $650,000 figure. I'm reluctant because, you know, throw it down at the dartboard. If I can back it up right now in 2020, we're looking at, we got to replace the tanker. We're in the process of working in that direction. I apologize, and this will be a little bit of the tanker update. Right now, the committee's still leaning in the direction of buying going out to state bid, buying a cabin chassis, and taking the rear body and doing a remount. Real ballpark figure is that's about between $200,000 and $225,000. So real money, we should save close to $100,000. If you look at this piece of paper and you change that 325 for the tanker replacement to 225, at the bottom line, it's going to add $100,000 to that. I think we're okay right now if we stay on the track we're at with 50,000 in 2020, and then in 21 going up to 60, and moving up in small increments. I'm not one to toss people come along behind me under the bus, but I'm not sure where the fire department fire truck market is going to go when you start looking at the fact that for a pumper in 10 years, to have to ask the voters for $750,000 for that truck, I'm not so sure that we're not gonna, communities aren't gonna be taking a hard look at lease purchases. And I know the negatives to a lease purchase, but, you know, I think I'm comfortable with where we're at right now for at least the next couple of trucks that are getting replaced. I think we're okay. I think that gives us a few years to start looking at this and saying, you know, do we have to bump it up to $100,000?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there like a mandatory replacement at a certain point on trucks that says that they're saying, okay, it's outlived its useful service life, you have to replace it?
Typically what happens is you just get to a point where it's hard to find the parts for them. The manufacturer has decided to stop making parts for, you know, some of the smaller parts. You know, not the, you know, I talked to Mark the other day a little bit about the fact that, you know, in a perfect world, you keep your older trucks, because the newer trucks, when you gotta work on them, are very expensive. We got the newest engine we have right now needs exhaust work, and it's probably gonna need a muffler. And if we have to put the newer catalytic converter style muffler on it, that's probably gonna be about $3,000 just for the muffler. It's crazy.
Dan?
Crazy.
To clarify, the only thing I know of, like airplanes, their chassis is a set hours. That's it. When you set hours, it's over.
Typically, looking at our thing and our forestry truck a few years ago, it should have been replaced in 2013. That truck right now has like 18 or 19,000 miles on it. We went back to the board and asked the board to give us the money to put a rear body on it. You know, and, you know, we're looking at 23 or 24 to get rid of it. It'll be 30 years old. It'll probably have 25 plus it.
Bless you. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate your feeling comfortable. When I look at the numbers, I look at what we're gonna ask taxpayers for increases and when. I personally would be more comfortable with going for the raise to $60,000 this year and push that out and maybe not go to 60, but wait till the 75 to see, get more information. Because as we push this out, I get very uncomfortable that we're gonna hit the big ticket, you know, down the road. So I would be more comfortable with revising that schedule a little bit if everybody felt that was appropriate.
Okay. I don't know. What's that? Yeah.
Chief, can I just ask you to review the Capital Reserve 2019 town report? And it doesn't have to be done right now, but can you go line item for line item from your starting value with the increase of 50,000 increase, deduction of 325, 60,000 increase? I'm off by 50,000 on the bottom number on that, just so you know. And I think it's occurring between 2020 and 2021.
Okay,
So I would just,
all right.
there may just be a formula missing in your Excel sheet or something, but I think we're off by 50,000.
All right, I will take a
The
look
50
at.
for 2020, it looks like
Yeah.
wasn't added in.
I think the 50 for 2020 was not added in as the 325 was subtracted, but the final figure, if I add both columns in my head.
Peter, you
and
must have
subtract-
that right top of your head right now, don't you?
It's 568, 670 is where it should.
The numbers
end up.
guys are better.
It looks to me like 2024, we should have a hint, but you don't take away the 250 in 2024. Is that assuming it's going to come out of the revolving fund? Because otherwise, I'm off by about 300,000,
Yes,
250,000 in 2060.
the ambulance, I believe, would come off the revolving fund. correct?
Yes, the ambulance is proposed to be in the ambulance revolving fund.
Well, and then that makes question of what, you know, the things we take out of the revolving fund at this point,
Right.
as far as personnel and the equipment that we've just passed out. Yeah, I don't think we can have both ways, I think, is what I'm asking.
I got you.
So let me ask the question about If we're talking about stepping it up, rather than going 10 grand in a whack, do we just do like a $5,000 increment? Like 5,000 one year, 5,000 the next, 5,000? That way, over a 5-year period, you get your $25,000. You're just doing it at $5,000 increments as opposed to taking 10 grand and then 15 grand.
Yeah, and if I'm off by 50, if Tracy's math, which I don't mean it negatively, but if Tracy's math is correct, I'm off for 50. then
Yes,
that puts us 50 closer to where,
Yep.
and that might. Right.
Did you find the same result, Peter?
I'm more off than you are, I guess, because
I took us from 2019.
in the 2023 to 24, if we're adding 75, it'd get us to the 393,670. That part I agree with. And then take 100,000 out and put 75 back, should be 25,000 less, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct.
This is higher.
So where do you think it's off, Tracy?
I thought it was off in 2021, so when you start out in 2018 and your figure of the 423, you increase by 50,000, you increase by 50,000, you subtract 325, you increase by 60,000. I thought it was happening between 2021 and 2020 that we fell off as far as the 50,000.
Maybe my approach is crazy, but
Oh, but you have it right.
I added the 60 before I took out the 325, and it looks correct.
We can review the spreadsheet and bring back an update when the fire chief comes back on November 4th.
That was the issue.
Okay. So just the final takeaways I have, we talked about doing a $5,000 increase on the capital reserve
Starting with 2020.
starting 2020. So does everybody agree
So
with
we'll go
that?
55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85 by 2026. Is that your proposal?
I think we are going up to the 75 mark
And staying
and
there?
then reassessing once we hit 75. But that,
It's only a
That's
$15,000
slowly-
difference, but I get
right,
you.
and
Okay.
it's going to be a fraction of a percentage from a budget standpoint.
Okay.
And I think the bigger piece of the puzzle we should, hopefully we'll have an answer for that by the 4th too, is where we're headed with the tanker, and if we are able, that $100,000 would be a big deal if we can make that work.
That'll be exciting.
So we'll revisit and then come back on the 4th. Thank you.
Thank you.
We good?
I have a couple more minor things.
Yep.
You said.
You're killing me.
Go on. I'd like to look at this year's expenditure. We just got the year-to-date through September. And the 4652, the protective gear for the, you really have a good amount remaining for the year. Do you have a plan for spending that?
Yes, so typically the protective gear is, we spend that, we're in the process of doing our gear inspections right now. I anticipate putting in a gear order, hopefully in early November, to purchase the 5 or 6 sets of gear, which will get us, we'll pretty much wipe that out.
Okay. Same thing on the EMS equipment?
EMS equipment?
Yeah, the 4754.
That's fire and EMS equipment.
Right.
So, yeah, typically what I do with that line is I typically try to make the purchases at the end of the year, because if, this year will be okay, but if I was gonna be in trouble budget-wise, that's usually the spot that I try to leave it so that I don't go over budget.
Now, the last item I have is your operating supplies, because you talked about that being in the wrong line of the budget. But when I look at the year-to-date, it's coded correctly in that line. It's over it's 6412 already through September. So, and your year-end estimate is still 6,000.
EMS
So I'm
operating?
No, this, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I'm just wondering if that 6,000 is adequate. So I'm looking at the other thing, I want you to, it looks like it's not.
Okay.
And just a quick update for the board and the advisory budget committee. So the updated year-to-date expenditures were delivered to department heads today, and they'll be reviewing for any changes to the estimated year-end expenditures. So certainly if the fire chief changes that estimated year-end from 6,000 to something more appropriate given what's spent already, I'll provide that updated information to the board. Thank you, Andrew.
Some of the cost out of that EMS operating expense is that purchasing some of the disposable supplies for the other ambulance, which I wouldn't expect now that they're there, that they would go back down a little bit next year.
Any final questions?
Rick, one of the points we made in our minutes, and it probably doesn't relate to anything other than are we setting aside enough money to cover things, is on the warrant articles where you cited 60,000 and the trustee of the trust funds told us they have 38,000.
And I apologize for that.
So the question once again is, are we setting enough aside to cover what your expectations are?
I think we can. I think it'll work. And I said 60,000. I forgot we spent $22,000 out of that line last year. And so I apologize for that.
No, that's fine.
Ahead of time. But if I can look at what that number is, and I probably will ask you to sit down with me from a numbers perspective and make sure that I'm understanding that I'm holding enough money in that line to cover the replacement of an ambulance down the road, which is probably the most important thing. And based on money coming in from a treasurer standpoint, the money that account brings in on a regular basis, if we could buy the monitor, move the monitor replacement out of that line and the stretcher out of that line, then we probably are okay with the equipment line because there won't be any real huge numbers coming real quick.
Because I think that was the item that got us thinking about, are we putting enough aside in the capital reserves to cover what our expectations are? So I wanted to make sure that I brought that up.
Thank you.
Going once, twice, three times, sounds good. All right, last questions set. Thank you.
One thing on the cemetery.
Great job bringing it in a zero budget.
What's that?
Zero in that.
No.
Wait, did I miss something?
I brought it
What did I
in.
miss? This one right here.
I want to show you that I added $8,000 to the mowing line, strictly as a placeholder at this point. I'm not sure if we're going to continue down the path of where we were because of the recent developments. So it's there. If at the end of the day, if by the time, if in January, if we have a clear idea of where we're going to head, then I certainly have no problem with stepping up and asking the board to make a change. If not, then I'll ask the board's diligence and the budget committee's diligence to leave it in there for a year. And if next spring we do something different, we'll make that adjustment next year.
Dan?
Have you took advantage of the tech committee yet for the new town hall coming up to the files? What's on there? You with the 3x5 cars?
We have a SEM sites program in there, and I will just say this. I will sit with Connor and have a discussion about what's in the best interest in moving forward, where we should go.
So is Connor going to do your training on the cemetery software?
Obviously, you haven't seen, if these two fingers fall off, I'm in trouble. You know, no, we already have it. The money is budgeted to continue that program. I'll just need to sit down with Connor and Peyton and have a discussion about where that's headed and what's in the best interest. Should we, do we need to look at doing something different?
And as requested at I believe it was the last select board meeting, we will be bringing an update on the progress of implementing the SEM Sites program. So that will be forthcoming.
I know, my wife would kill me, but I honestly, like, I would sit at home at night at like 10 o'clock and just key these in to get them in the system.
Well, and that may be an option. I think once we get the cemeteries in, then it's okay. It's just,
Yeah,
it's a
it's
very
getting it in.
daunting task to get it in there, and certainly.
And what you'll see,
I know, we gotta get it in.
yeah, wait for the update. What you'll see in the update is the phased implementation of utilizing the program, turning the front-facing portion of the program on while, continuously updating the thousands of past records.
Well, now that like technology committee, building committee, but like compensation committee are all winding down, there's all this extra time to fill in voids.
You're a glutton for punishment.
Thank you, chief.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that everyone enjoyed the bakery products.
They were amazing.
I went out of my way for them.
So I'm going to request
Wait
a
a
bio break because we are 2+ hours and I'm at least 16 ounces of water in, so.
They're all gone, I didn't even get one.
Because you got caught with hand in the cookie jar. 5-minute recess. Thank you.
I think you did. I think you did her next time.
Mark will be here now.
Way too much sugar. Your wife would be horrified. Okay.
What sort of evil punishment was it?
No, it was him.
Well, we're gonna be on almost a month.
You could convince my wife to come in.
She doesn't need it home.
Couple times I worked.
I want. Connor said take care.
Some slack on the purple wire?
I'll jump on it.
Dan said the Red Bull,
Slack
yeah,
in it.
he's gonna
Yeah,
put it
slack.
up till 11:30.
I'll give
I really planned it.
There's only one can.
See if that computer will.
Trying to, be cognizant of it, keep track here.
There was one of the, I once went on a trip and they said, you have a cell phone, let me show you a trick here. See how many times it'll skip across the ocean when you throw it. So it's the perfect shape for skipping.
Right, yeah, flat and rectangular, right?
That's right. We'll see how many it'll do.
Because her husband.
I do need to go though. We'll see you next Monday, or this Tuesday, next Tuesday. There's a good program perhaps on school funding tomorrow here, I believe, at 6:30.
Well, usually you
Matt Town, our
You were beginning to talk like
representative, put this thing together. He didn't put it together, he's heard this presentation on, for the state on how we can fund schools. Might be very.
Always an interesting topic.
Yeah, and he says it's really good, it's pretty nonpartisan.
Yeah.
Did you have? Make a big difference.
I did not, we not.
Some way to do that since, school, 60% of our tax bill? Yeah, so it's here at 6:30.
Okay, thanks.
That was a long time ago, I'm still there.
I think Tracy mentioned it.
Somebody had mentioned that.
We don't start.
Have a good night. Okay.
He may not have done the same
I
person
understand.
Tracy, but he did
Where-
tell me
where's
he
she at?
called that he reached out to a maid service, so that was.
She
actually worked here for I'm gonna wind up waiting till
Oh,
spring.
did she really?
But he don't wait till spring. He said, well, we're coming north. You're in Barrington, there is no closed market
And
right now.
honestly, and if you need, I was a long.
Staying awake?
Thank you for all your work.
That's not.
Oh, no, yes, okay, yeah, I'll bring that up when I
She was gonna get a part-time job, but she can't do it.
Was it comfortable?
Brief answers. But there's cookies still.
John, I can take them all.
Well, you know what you can say is.
Like in the air? Yeah. Like in Maine?
Just staying around till the end, saying.
Oh, not like the Maine.
The Chiefs Oreos, all the way to that.
That's the John,
Right, yeah. Was that dinner, John?
I love that menu too. It's
No, I actually got a couple of hot dogs and burgers on the way in.
Oh, you're really classing it up tonight, huh?
Well, yeah, I bet. I keep hearing that it's not like every end of the season they keep saying it's their last season, that's their last season. Oh, really? It's gonna be.
Yeah.
Did somebody wrangle up our smoking population here?
We should have Rebecca in here too.
No,
No?
I just checked.
I can smell it.
the fact that she sucked all that from
If they want to have
Dan must
that
be too
meeting
close
up
to the
there,
door.
I don't think they would. Well, I'll go.
Oh, yeah, let me smell it.
But you did a very good job.
Good,
I
good.
had.
Oh, that's nasty.
Did you smell it?
Oh, yeah.
And alerted the neighborhood.
Go hit them with the fire truck.
Can't go again.
There's something on fire out there.
Closing down.
The best thing, I'm sure you've probably seen it, is the video of like the guy smoking in the gas station. The guy picks up the extinguisher and just hoses him down with it. Dry chem, like perfect.
Some guys over in Rochester.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That's why you had to go and walk in there, was when you're walking off, so he didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, he can eat all he wants as long as he exercises, that's what he said.
You want to step to the door, tell them we're holding the meeting in here, let's go.
No, Jason was in the back.
Well put, Don.
Smoking, is that what you guys do?
Yes. You know me.
I was.
Smoking away. Good thing they made it legal.
I thought this building and the surrounding was no smoking.
Yeah, it is.
It's a school.
It is no smoking.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. During school hours or just?
It's
Nope.
in general, doesn't matter.
Well, that's for you.
All the time.
We could have you arrested. Arrested.
Feel free.
I think we should.
Can I use my new toilet I just put in?
Yeah. I'm gonna take pictures while George is putting you in handcuffs.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Proud of it, that's the worst part. The first time George put you in handcuffs, or first time Billy in handcuffs?
No, George. Oh, gosh. Between him and Benny, they used to like, they used to have fun.
Well, they do say handcuff you to the fence of the BYO and we come back a couple hours later, we always.
I've never done that.
Oh, you wouldn't?
No.
Actually, honestly.
The days of that was gone before I started.
Good.
I'm waiting for the town administrator.
I know, yell at Connor, let's go.
Tracy's still in the.
I said 5 minutes, not 15.
But you should not even say 5, let it
Cases of
go.
offenses they do,
That
actually,
makes them move a little faster.
Honestly.
No, he'd slip out of my handcuffs.
Connor McIver to the front, Connor McIver.
Yeah, some person autographs here. I don't
We
even
got, bring him out, right, it's good enough.
I'm ready to go. We can go,
They followed you, so that's your fault.
Well, if they were following me, the Pied Piper was back in there.
I mean,
Okay. Agenda item number 4, review the minutes.
Public comment.
Sorry.
Going once? Oh, no, we're one.
You've already.
You have 3 minutes.
No, I'm good, I'm good.
Twice? All right, review of minutes.
I'm all set.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I'll second it. Oh,
go ahead.
no, ladies for gentlemen.
Another gentleman.
All right, so we have a second. Roll call vote.
Here, I.
Nap aye. All right. Old business, or staff reports, excuse me. Administrator McIver, please.
So everything that I have to report is an agenda item within the budget. I will draw the board and community's attention to the fact that we have no year-round, full-time or regular part-time employee that was hired in the month of October, currently employed in town of Barrington. So I made it a habit to report work anniversaries every month. This is the first month where nobody to report. I do expect that the town will make a couple of hires this October that will hopefully still be with us next year, and I'll be glad to update the board on their work anniversary as appropriate. And I'll turn it over to Municipal Office Administrator Cottle.
You're funny.
Oh, goodness. For your review and signature, I've brought your, an AP manifest, 2019-80, dated 10/2/2019, and 2 notice of intents to cut wood or timber, one for map 243 lot 35, the second on map 270 lot 76. That's it.
Very good. Old business, the school-town shared services. Connor, do you want to elaborate on that?
For board discussion tonight, the board had previously began the discussion of the shared services, separately the facility manager and the shared services of plowing and mowing, use of salt and sand, use of fuel, other equipment sharing that exists. You have in your packet 2 documents, the original memorandum of understanding for the facility manager role and a school-town collaboration which outlines which services are provided where, and on the back is cooperative projects which have been undertaken. So the board had requested the scheduling of a joint board meeting between the select board and school board to discuss this topic and how the cooperation should be defined moving forward. I've requested that joint board meeting and I have not heard back regarding affirmation or the beginning of scheduling, but I do anticipate we'll be hearing back soon. So if there is a discussion the board would like to have regarding changes to the cooperative services as they exist now, I think it is reasonable to consider the facility manager, which we previously paid a little over $20,000 a year for, separate from the shared services where the school provides mowing and landscaping services, and through the warm season, and the town provides supplemental snow plowing, salt and sand, and fuel and equipment as needed through the rest of the seasons. So I would imagine this would be a discussion from the select board of support for this model going forward, or adjustments the board would like to see made in preparation for a hopeful joint board meeting between the select board and school board.
Commentary from the board?
I think we talked about the varying cost of plowing annually. I think last time we met, we talked about the varying cost of plowing, sanding, and the potential varying cost of diesel. Do we still feel comfortable that this is a mutually beneficial financial arrangement based on the current figures that we have?
I will say with confidence that I believe the collaboration and shared services is beneficial to the taxpayers. I believe your question is, are the costs to the town offsetting to the cost to the school? And I don't know if I have information to indicate whether or not I think it's perfectly offset. At some point, I think the most important aspect is what's in the best interest of taxpayers, because all the money comes from the same area. But making sure that, I also support the idea of making sure voters know where their money is going.
Sure.
And what services it's supporting.
Okay.
Dan?
I'm kind of disappointed that we can't have a joint meeting for a better understanding.
The request is still outstanding.
And then, yeah, I think the memorandum when we come, it has to be clear how we do this and stuff, because I still feel the 2-cent budget is a legal matter involved. As long as we have a clear understanding, I'll be happy.
So are there any changes that the select board would like me to bring to the school board in advance of a joint meeting?
I'm just going to give our fire chief a moment to comment because he's falling out of his seat.
I'll use it as my 3 minutes. I appreciate that. As somebody who's been involved over the years in working with the school and the town on a number of projects, there's a couple of things that I hope both sides take away from this, and it's exactly what Connor said. Look at the pieces, be less concerned about what has a bigger impact on the town or the bigger impact on the school budget. Let's be honest and open to the taxpayers, but look what's in the best interest of the people that are paying the bills. And for example, I'll just say this, when it comes to fuel, the options are that the school gets fuel from us, or the school goes out and gets cards and either gets it from the state or gets it from a local gas station, and ultimately that costs the taxpayers a little bit more money. So I think fuel's one of them kind of resources where you sit there and say, it really doesn't matter if the town buys it or the school buys it, we use it and it's costing the taxpayers the same amount of money. And again, not to get into the highway side of it, but if by a collaborative effort with salt and sand, certainly reduces the cost of the taxpayers if the school had to go out and do something different, which may include building a shed to put salt in and equipment and stuff like this. So really what I hope that you five and the five on the school board look at a little bit less about who put in, whether it's a 60-40, 70-30, whatever it is, and more about the pieces that you folks are willing to collaborate on. You ultimately look at, is it cheaper for the town to pick up this expense or the school to pick up this expense and save the most money? So, thank you.
I would also agree with that from our end, we should be, it's not necessarily about what is the select board versus what is the school board, it's what is mutually most beneficial for the taxpayer of the town.
And I will interject two pieces of information. One, myself, the road agent, and Aaron from that department met with the superintendent, the middle school principal, and maintenance employee regarding snow removal and opportunity for the road agent to meet the players on the school side, information sharing for calling school, things like that. One of the things we did talk about was the expectations of snow removal, what was standard practice and what might be best moving forward. As it stands right now, the town takes care of all of the parking and travel lane snow removal for the ECLC and provides 50% of the snow removal approximately throughout the course of a winter for the elementary school. One of the things that we talked about was each storm is different, and the impact on the highway department's crew and the school crew is different based on the amount of snow. The route takes about the same amount of time for the crew in the highway department, but plowing parking lots may be quicker with a smaller storm. So it could be that it's in the best interest of both that the school crew would be available to assist with parking lot snow removal at the town hall, public safety building, or elsewhere. Just as in a heavier storm, it might be in the best interest of the community for the highway department to either have staff or equipment available to help with the heavier snow removal at the school facilities. So it seemed like there was interest in increased collaboration, but I think it would need to be something defined by the school board and select board to that end. The second piece, and I'll be quick, is I polled some area administrators and city managers about how the collaborative efforts were handled in their communities. And so far I've received a handful of pretty detailed documents that if we were going to define this relationship better, we have some templates that we could work from based on how some other communities have handled the situation. One thing that's interesting is none of the agreements that I've seen so far have a transfer of money. It just defines the services and what the expectations are and what the remedies in certain situations, what remedies exist. So.
Thank you.
All right.
So no changes proposed by the select board at this time, but still very interested in a joint meeting to discuss the topic.
Yes.
And is there any additional information you'd like to see from me in advance of a joint meeting?
Nothing at this point.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything they want to see? All right. Moving right along. Fire tanker update, I'm assuming we're all set on. Wildcat Road turnaround update. Mark, would you like to come on up and
So you have in your packet
celebrate your victories?
an update that Mark will speak to regarding this turnaround on Wildcat Road.
Mark doesn't have a mustache.
Okay, before we get into the turnarounds, we took delivery of our new 20-ton low bed last week. Nice unit. We've already put it into service. Guys really appreciate it. They're not working unsafe now. So very sorely needed, very much appreciated. Thank you folks and thank you taxpayers. Wildcat Road, emergency and school bus and plow equipment turnaround. I came to you on August 21st and told you that if we worked for free, basically we could do that for $27,550. Through lady luck and juggling a few things around, changing a few things, not to the detriment of the job. The job was meant to be paved. It was built to be paved. Okay, so if we need to do that down the road, nothing's been compromised. Came in at $10,750 for all materials, vendors, and rentals. Some of those materials, Highway Department already owned on premises, but I've attached a market value to them within the $10,750. If we had to figure a cost for our trucking and machine hours, you know, another $11,360 to the town portion. That's what it was worth for us to do it. So came in considerably lower than the construction estimate by the engineers and way considerably lower than the construction estimate from the contractor.
The lowest bid that we received on this project was $73,000, and the engineer's estimate was almost $50,000. So the Mark and the crew did a great job.
Yeah.
Victory in my book. Thank you.
And a $6,000 savings.
Excellent. Thank
From,
you, Mark.
yeah, from what he proposed.
$17,000.
And if, no, that's saying if he
below.
valued the labor and crew in on that.
Right.
But that's great. This is.
So we also, last Friday, wrapped up the Old Settlers Road turnaround. Here again, built to pave if we need to do it. It's all there the way it needs to be. Total materials and vendors, including the excavator rental. I extended the rental on the excavator for 2 weeks beyond the term that we were supposed to send it back. Going weekly at that point, it ended up about $1,200 a week, but I had so much additional work for it, it was worth the extra 2 weeks. Not necessarily worth the whole month, because I gotta wrap this stuff up at the end of this week.
And to be clear, the select board had previously authorized a rental up through the end of October. The original plan was to send it back at the end of September, but as Mark said, took advantage of a couple more weeks.
Right. So the total materials and vendors, including our excavator rental, here again, we had 50% of those materials right in our dooryard doing nothing that we already purchased who knows when. That came to $6,957, and that's with all materials, including stuff we already owned, being tabulated at market prices. And if you had to figure something for the town equipment usage, you're in around, you know, $5,625. That total turnaround, $12,582.
I've seen the turnaround on Wildcat. It came out incredible. The crew did a great job at Mark's direction. I haven't been out to Old Settlers yet, but I understand the same is to be expected out there.
we're very fortunate to have some really talented people on that highway crew, very proficient people with the equipment.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I saw Wildcat during construction, and it was going to come along very well.
Great. Thank you for your hard work.
Great news, thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
New business, Town Hall Building Committee recommendation. So many meetings, interviews with everyone. There were, to give everyone an idea of how it came through from the building committee, the building committee was initially asked to rank their orders based on the ranking. Groen was the low person by 1 point, but after a lot of discussion and conversation, Carino was the recommendation from the building committee. 3 of the 4 recommended a wood frame construction. One was in at ICF. One of the advocating points around Carino was that they could do both wood frame or ICF. So that is the basic overview I had. I'll let Connor add anything more that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So what you'll see in the draft minutes from that Town Hall Building Committee, you'll see that the committee reviewed the 13 evaluation criteria that were listed in the request for qualifications. The group found that all 4 of the respondents were highly qualified to undertake the project, and the conversation really centered around, as Select Person Knapp had mentioned, what organization could bring us the most value, did we feel could bring us the most value for our budget. And a lot of the discussion and the determination that the building committee came to was based on the interviews we had. It was a very valuable step of the process. Each organization brought multiple members of their design build team to discuss the project with us and give us a sense for what value they could bring us. So at the end of the process, based on the evaluation criteria itemized and the value that the group felt the town of Barrington could receive, the group did vote to recommend Carino Construction for the project, and in priority order is Carino Construction, Gruen Construction, Witcher Builders, and North Branch Construction. I do want to underscore the fact that the group felt very strongly that all 4 organizations could provide a quality product for the town of Barrington, but based on value and trust had the confidence in Carino Construction, just slightly edged out over the others.
Dan?
Do we want to hear recommendations from the chairman of the building committee?
We hear it. We just,
You go,
don't need to speak.
Any conversation from the board?
No, I mean, I had come to the.
Microphone.
Sorry. I had come to the conclusion that the building committee had done all of the background work on this, and that I would take whatever recommendation the committee brought forward.
On information provided, I'll make a motion to give the recommendation.
Is your motion to select Carino Construction and authorize the town administrator advised by the Town Hall Building Committee to develop a contract?
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. You took words right out of my mouth.
I would second that.
There, aye.
Cody? Ms. Hatch?
Hatch eye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Nap aye.
And I will note that Ben Carino, a member of his team, is here tonight. Congratulations. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well,
Welcome.
I hope it looks like this, would be happy. I hear all the time, just keep married tomorrow. Okay.
We had a great conversation about what rural character meant,
Yeah.
and what this project would look like in the town of Barrington.
Excellent.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Anything else that anyone would like to add? Any commentary from either the chairman of the building committee or Carino Construction?
Oh, on the spot.
Yep.
I know.
As I'm walking out my way out, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity. Look forward to a fun, very challenging project.
We look forward to having an actual town hall when not renting, so I'm putting this on tape.
Yeah, we know how much this project means to the town. You've invested a lot of time and resources into it, and we're hoping to take you across the finish line.
Thank you.
Great.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
All right.
Thank you.
Police grant acceptance.
So I'll invite the Deputy Police Chief, George Joy, to the microphone to present the grant receipt from Office of Highway Safety.
So the grant's a little out of sync. Where we do our budget in March, the state of New Hampshire opts to run fiscal year October 1 through September 30, so we're slightly off. We apply for grants in April, and the grant process was completed. The state of New Hampshire awarded us a grant of $10,445 for the separate initiatives contained within the grant, which you guys have. This all comes out of line item 4196. Last year budgeted 1286. The 25% match this year will be 2612, technically 261125, but who's counting? Which we'll go over on October 21st. What we're looking for is approval to sign off on those grants so we can send them back to the state of New Hampshire and get rolling with the grant fund expenditures.
Can you share just quickly the truncated, what the grant is to be used for?
So the grant's broken down into separate. The two big ones are the STEP grant and the DUI enforcement. Those are the two big numbers. The STEP grants encompass mandatory days throughout the course of the year, generally one a month, though they did mess with that a little bit last year. Those statewide days, for instance, it'll be the town of Barrington, the town of Lee, the town of Epping, the state police, the Stratford County Sheriff's Office, and I think that the city of Rochester gets them too. We'll all be on the roads at the same time. Generally, those run during commuter hours, 6 to 10, 7 to 11, and then 1300 to 1700-ish. I won't give you exact numbers because they do change from time to time. It also incorporates the clicker to ticket initiative that we hear on the radio, among others. So all the big broadcasted state initiatives are contained within that as well. The DUI enforcement isn't mandated at any point in time. We have, again, two initiatives where the state of New Hampshire says you will work between X day and Y day. They don't tell us when, they just say you have to work. The DUI blocks are broke down into 6 hours, generally 7 to 1-ish. Again, we can drive those by our statistics. The Department of Highway Safety is big on stats, so they let us work to our towns. Certainly the town of Barrington's bars are open at different times than the city of Manchester's bars, so they let us work to ours. But that's in effect the big initiatives that we have to drive with the state of New Hampshire.
And what is the Operation Safe Commute?
Operation Safe Commute are those mandatory days that I was speaking of.
Okay, thank you.
And STEP stands for Traffic Enforcement Program,
Yes.
Traffic Enforcement Program or something.
Selective Traffic Enforcement Program.
So motion to accept the police grant of $10,445 as outlined in the Office of Highway Safety Grant Agreement for fiscal year 2020.
I will second that.
Air I.
Hardikoff, aye?
That by.
Thank you very much.
And we have those documents for the board to sign tonight. I will also ask the chair to allow one other gift acceptance for the police department, if I can present that, not on the budget currently, or not on the agenda currently.
Sure.
So the heating and cooling contractor for the renovation of the public safety building, G-Big Heating and Cooling, had approached the previous facility manager and now the police chief to offer at his own cost, free to the town and installation, a mini split, a unit for the Sally Port at the police department, which wasn't previously conditioned. And his intent, knowing that Deputy Chief Joy will frequently park his vehicle in the Sally Port with the dog inside, the G-Big Heating and Cooling felt that it was appropriate to offer a gift to the town of a mini split to have that be conditioned space for the dog. So it would require board action to accept that gift and allow the installation.
Tracy?
Does the person donating the splitless duct system reside in the town of Barrington? Could the person? Epping, fabulous. So motion to accept the donation of that item for our beautiful canine officer and his pal, and I think it's a great idea.
Gypsy, do you want to clarify which one was which?
I'll second.
Chairperson Knapp, really?
Select person has seconded that motion.
Nap aye.
Hardikoff, aye.
Hatch eye.
Air aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Great job. All right. Additional 2020 warrant article.
So again, the select board votes to put warrant articles to town meeting in 2020. It was previously requested that the board consider putting Keno back on the warrant
For the
for
third year?
consideration 2020. Yes, for the third year.
I'll make the recommendation. It's a very good program.
I'll second it.
Is there,
Air aye.
Hatch eye.
Hardikoff, nay.
Nap aye.
Third year. Okay.
Third year's a charm.
and again, to be clear, it is the residents' decision.
Yes, it is.
And so they'll have an opportunity to vote on that again in
I think
March.
they have twice. Okay.
Well, they turned down a town hall like.
Sure, okay. Where we at?
We are at delinquent taxes in the town report.
So it was brought up at a previous meeting by Select Person Bailey to have a direction from the select board to include delinquent taxes in the town report. I indicated that I wouldn't do such without a voted decision by the select board, and indicated that I would put it on a future agenda. So this would be for if the board felt as a whole it was appropriate to put delinquent taxes in the town report, please vote to do so.
Dan,
I'll make the motion.
will you make a motion? You do anything with it?
To add that in the town report.
Is there a second?
Is it put the person's name in there?
No,
Well, yes, it
Yes,
would.
sir, it would.
Oh.
Is there a second?
I'll make it a first, so. I'm
We
not
are
scared.
very aware of that, select person.
If I'm inappropriate, I don't care.
So there is no second on it, so
Noted, thank you.
Welcome.
Let's talk about a bridge that really affects me. That I really want open again.
Be glad to.
Great.
That's a sore subject.
No, it's exciting. It looks beautiful. I have pictures. Oh my God.
State came in, shut it down. Crack.
Malago Bridge.
So the Malago Bridge is set to open on October 16th. We have our final site visit this Friday. There's been a request to have, as the opening ceremony, to allow longtime local resident Jody Beal to be the first resident across the bridge in his tractor. My understanding is you can frequently see Mr. Beal riding his tractor and bike around town. I believe he's a resident of Beauty Hill. And so the bridge will be open on the 16th, and there was a request to allow him to be the first across the completed bridge.
And
I'll make the motion. Ain't rural, nothing else is. I love traffic going down the road.
I'll second the motion.
Air aye.
Hatch eye.
Article 5.
Nap aye. How, just as a general update, any, like I normally see like weekly notes based on your final meeting with there. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, no, so it's on track. They're ahead of schedule from the contract schedule for opening on the 16th. Just waiting for final guardrail installation and road striping. The project has gone well from the standpoint of the abutters. We haven't heard a concern of noise or other issues that sometimes you do on construction projects. Any issues identified by the select board have been remedied to the satisfaction of the engineer and town administrator, including additional epoxy sealant and membrane installation for the crack previously identified, and the epoxy coating of the rebar ends where the wing wall was cut away as additional protections for the work that was done. So like I said, I'll be meeting with the engineers and general contractor on Friday, and I will relay any additional information prior to the bridge opening on the 16th.
Mr. Air?
I got two things. There's no top coat pavement going on there?
There will be.
And striping? all right?
Yes, correct.
And then, can you show me the pictures? Of the membrane and everything?
I can get any photos that the engineers have while they're on site for the epoxy filling of the crack and so they took the plans called for a barrier membrane to come over, I believe 18 or 24 inches over the edge of the deck before the deck was overtopped with concrete. And so one of the remedial actions for the crack, which was identified in the middle of each abutment wall, was to continue that barrier membrane after filling the crack with epoxy or sealant, continuing that barrier membrane down all the way subgrade on the abutment on both sides as an additional remedial action. And so the contractor performed that remedial work as expected. As far as pictures, I can check with the engineer. I know they were on site when it was done.
Tracy?
Could I just ask that we send a postcard up Malago Road and over to Cape residents just to alert them that it's reopening? Many people have taken to walking Malago because the bridge has been closed. New people have moved on to Malago and have situated their children's playground right on that corner. And my fear is that if we don't alert them that it is opening, people will not be aware of the increased traffic that's going to begin to happen. So I think from a safety perspective, the 50 cents or so to mail a postcard and just alert people that the bridge is now reopening, you should expect an increase in traffic through that area.
So to be clear, all the residents of Cape Road and Malago Road?
Yeah, I think it's less than $50, but I think it could have a big impact on safety.
I'd be glad to make sure that happens.
Dan?
They have signage down there, is that, nice signage down there? And I think that would solve the problem.
I'm assuming it's not hosting like the sort, or just the detour sign comes down and the game on?
I think it could be really dangerous. It's had a huge increase in walkers walking their dogs.
Without
kids
direction from
playing
another
and
board
riding
member, I can make
bikes
sure that
and-
happens.
Direct you now. No. All right, select persons reports. Mr. Air?
Yes, there's an email around 07 about the Richardson Goodwill Dam and stuff. And then part of the notes recommend login and then the maintenance and stuff of the dam. So I talked to the town lands chairman and stuff. They already initiated a course for the Goodwill and thing. And the town lands committee is willing to take a look at the dam and the state studies and stuff and give a recommendation to the department heads and Connor and the board. But we need time to get all information and put it on the agenda, and we'll get back to you ASAP.
Okay. Select person Hatch?
Again, our next meeting with the zoning board is the 16th of October, and nothing's changed since then.
Select person Hardikoff?
So I attended the school board meeting. It was a co-board meeting, including the Oyster River School Board. Of note, both boards have worked to ensure that children moving from our middle school to the Oyster River High School are up to date and proficient in foreign language, that our students are actually scoring higher from Barrington on SAT scores in math. That was kind of exciting to hear. We have an increased enrollment from 100 new entry level, I assume at early childhood or kindergarten level, of students, 5% increase in students over what had been expected That sounds like a lot, it's 5 students. So we've gone from entering about 100 students per year into our school system to 105. It was a very good meeting, very productive. The school board will be bringing forward recommendations that they came to a determination on how they would handle the facilities project. I can speak to that if you need me to, but I think it's best to let them do that in a co-board meeting capacity. But lots and lots of positive information about being a community with school choice and how Barrington will continue to grow, and actually the average age of our residents will continue to drop because we are a school choice community, and that certainly affects us in our planning, but it was a very good meeting.
All right. Well, I provided an update from the building committee earlier. The planning board had a meeting on Monday. They reviewed the application from Groupon LLC for 20 townhouse units off Route 9. We did a site review on that. There was a request for an extension for a cell tower, and there was a lengthy review for an application for firing range, Mill Pond Investors of Barrington LLC. There also was a discussion on the solar, what's the right word for it? Ordinance, thank you. It was basically around the fact that we're pretty close to being at the point where it's ready to go as a warrant, so talking about the timing on that and when and where that moves forward.
Is the planning board's intention still to bring that to voters in 2020?
Yes.
Okay. One of the unique requests made by the library group for their project this year was to work, if possible, to have the library bond be warrant article number 3 again. And I indicated that that would only happen if there was one and only one zoning article and no other bond requests. So if that's the only zoning article that I'm aware of right now. So if that does make it onto the warrant through the appropriate hearings, then it seems very likely that the library bond will be warrant article number 3 again, and they'll be able to reuse their signs.
The sign's still there.
Well,
I mean,
Yes, it
we're
is.
a town, we're in violation of our own regulations, and nobody does anything about it.
the appropriate parties have been informed of their violation. It's their duty to do with that information as they may. And as far as Barrington's sign ordinance, we enforce those zoning issues based on complaints. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a formal complaint to the zoning enforcement officer regarding the signs.
Sounds like you might have just got one.
So you're telling me that you've got to make a complaint in order to get your zoning enforced?
Yes.
Written complaint.
Written complaint, signed.
That's why I have email cards. If you email me.
And the state is also aware and prepared, as I shared with the board, a report of RSA violations at the intersection of 9 and 125. And all of that information was shared with the appropriate parties, and it would be the state's responsibility to enforce those violations as they see fit.
So in other words, what you're telling me, or what I'm hearing, is if I want to put up a sign, the only way it's going to be taken down is if there's a complaint.
Well, to be clear, if the zoning enforcement officer were to pursue a complaint with signs at the intersection of 9 and 125, the zoning issue goes to the property owner. So that means our zoning enforcement officer would be contacting the state, indicating that there were signs on state property in the town of Barrington which were in violation of our zoning ordinance because they weren't properly permitted. So a formal complaint to the zoning office would still land on the state's desk for their review and consideration.
The sign that is on, is on town property.
The sign on Ramsdale Lane, the colorful sign which was vandalized last year is still there. My understanding from last year is that the library, Barrington Library Foundation received specific permission from the select board to place that sign on town property.
Not to leave it, but to place it for their purpose of the
That-
vote.
That's right, for what?
There was nothing about leaving
right.
it for an extended period of time there. I remember that conversation vividly.
If you'd like me to ask them to make an additional request to keep it there, I'd be glad to.
Clarify, on signs, you got freedom of speech too. If someone will put something in front of the house, that is not a violation of the contents. If you're doing a business, something like that, you could speak. Don Hatch will always love Doug Hatch. Every house, no one can say anything about it.
So, and to be perfectly honest, the issue that the state runs into with enforcing the right-of-way violations that exist is being very careful of content-based decisions or enforcement actions in violation of the First Amendment. So if the state were to act at the intersection of 9 and 125, they would almost, being that they're aware of the numerous violations, they would almost have to act unilaterally on all violations to avoid First Amendment issues with content-based discrimination.
If we don't want to bother with signs, I have no problem with it. You put a sign any way you want, it's your sign, your land. But then do away with it completely,
With the ordinance?
with the sign ordinance. If it's not going to be enforced, then what's the point of it? Sorry, I never could see zoning that you don't bother to enforce. So, I mean, like I say, as far as I'm concerned, have as many signs as you want.
Dan?
If someone does it right and they get the setbacks and right, it's not gonna be a distraction to cause accidents. If it's placed in the right spot, it won't interfere with snow and pushing back snow and stuff. So, there are some honest people in this world.
I will say I don't disagree with Dan, like, don't make rules that I'm not willing to enforce.
So, and this certainly predates me, and I'd be happy to have John Huckins speak to it if you'd like to. Our approach, Barrington's approach to zoning violations, my understanding has been quite successful in productively decreasing the number of zoning violations and working with property owners to come into compliance. I think a lot of that has to do with the personality of our zoning enforcement officer in working with folks and being willing to lead people to compliance. The practice in Barrington, based on staffing and number of issues, the practice has been, at the direction of the select board, to enforce based on written complaints. And so the pursuing written complaints is how the office handles zoning violations. If the direction from the select board is to have the zoning enforcement officer travel around town and seek violations for zoning enforcement issues, I would suspect that you'd hear that we need more staff and...
You're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Yep.
I'm explaining the practice that I understand at the direction from the select board that our zoning office has implemented.
I don't think what Dawn is alluding to is, she's not saying have him run around and scour things out, but when somebody puts something blatant and obvious right in front of your face, you stop and have a conversation with them about the fact that...
Yeah, you can do it very
And so that
nicely.
conversation's been had. They understand that they're in violation of Barrington sign ordinance and the state's RSAs with use of state property in the right-of-way. And if the intent is to have the state's violation of the Barrington's ordinance enforced or the state's violation of their RSA enforced, that will ultimately fall under the responsibility of the state.
Tracy?
So it was my understanding that that is exactly the case, that we are not the force of enforcing the violation that has been identified, and that should the state want to bring forward the issue, that they will. And at this time, we've done everything that's appropriate, which is due diligence to identify who is actually responsible for it, certainly conveying the information to the committee, and as far as I'm concerned, should the state want to pursue it, they will.
So put your signs out and carry out.
Absolutely.
I'm just,
I
so
haven't
I'm
got
just,
one ready to put out.
Oh, God.
John.
I don't think it's fair to put that on John. They know, he has spoken to them.
The issue with the state is New Hampshire's not a home rule state, so we only have the authority given to us by the state. The state is exempt from town regulations, so I can go scream at them all I want. I got no authority to make the state do anything. I don't know what else I can say to it.
No, that's
again, we've learned
exactly what I said.
diligence, we have to move past it if they choose not to respond to it anyway.
All right, are there any final comments from Chairman or Administrator Cottle?
Yeah, it is nice.
I have nothing additional, and I have no request for non-public.
Final comments from the board, anything? Seeing none, final public comment? I was waiting for you to get up earlier and I was going to
I didn't
tell
want
you, you have to wait for public comment.
Well, I was being good.
You have 3 minutes.
Casey O'Brien, 24 Hall Road. I'd just like to, as the chairman of the building committee, thank the Board of Select Persons for accepting our recommendation. We've worked very, very hard to come down to a great contractor, I think, moving forward, and they were all great contractors, not just 1, 2, or 3, or 4. So thank you for that. And then the Malago Bridge, I just have one question on it. The curbing on Malago Bridge, there's no tip downs on the curb. So there's a flat, nice 8-inch flat edge. So even if they put guardrail up, it's gonna be maybe inside the guardrail, maybe not. So I'm just concerned about that moving forward, especially that we have a 1-ton with a wing that's a lot lower than the guardrail now. So it doesn't bump the guardrail when it goes by one. It'll actually slide under it a little bit. So that's just a concern on looking at construction of it. So
On one.
that's, I'm just going there.
All right.
Hold on.
Yeah, please.
Real quick, the fire department open house is this Saturday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. For people that might watch this between now and then, stop on by. Boy Scouts will be there cooking burgers and stuff, fire trucks, hats, and all kinds of stuff.
Okay, thank you. All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All vote?
You abstain?
Oh, yeah. Carry on.
Cat drive.
Hardikoff, aye.
Napa.
We're out of here.